This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real events or persons is purely coincidental. This story is purely fictional and does not promote or encourage any form of violence. Skill increase Shadow Spike, Novice 2. Spell damage, if perfectly executed, 20. Mana cost, 20. Perfect. His attempts to use specific portions of shadows so he would hit critical areas must be helping him to understand his spell a bit better. He kept on tracking and attacking, leaving all the bodies where they fell. Hopefully, this small amount of bodies wouldn't be enough to spawn a zone quest, because he couldn't pick the bodies up. He was only wearing clothes, a ring, and his robe while carrying a scepter, and he was already nearly overburdened. His strength modifier was a serious hindrance, and he swore to himself that he would get strength and constitution to a basic human level as soon as possible. Until then, he had to hope that he wouldn't set off a zombie fox apocalypse. A few experience points later, he stopped to examine the wound that his shadow spike made in an animal. It tended to leave a large hole in the pelt, and as far as he could see, there was no way to know that the damage was caused by magic. It looked the same to him, as if a spear had been thrust into the creature. Releasing a huff of air, Joe decided that he needed to see the spike more closely if he was going to understand how it worked. He stepped into the shadow of a tree and cast the spell, keeping a close eye on where the spike was intended to appear. Thud! The spike slammed into the tree, vanishing an instant later. Joe cast the spell again, getting a bit closer. Thud! It was really strange to watch this process. The shadow of the tree bunched up and rose from the ground, while the remainder of the shadow brightened wasn't the correct word. There was no extra light, but perhaps the colors in the area were easier to see. They penetrated the gloom under the tree as though the color saturation was higher, the hue more vivid than it should be. The effect only lasted a fraction of a second, so it was hard to study. Joe started to cast the spell again, but this time tried to keep an active connection of mana to the spike. Nope. Again, didn't work. The third time, though, the spike seemed to last just a tiny bit longer. Joe tried one more time, and the spike shot off the ground and stayed impaled in the tree. Mana was flowing out of him, but the drain didn't affect him too much since he had such a high regeneration rate. In the corner of his vision, a notification was blinking at him, so he focused on it, even though the spike vanished as his attention wavered. Skill gained. Channeling, Novice 1. Spray and pray. Fire and forget. Not this mage. At 75% spell cost per second, you can maintain a connection to a spell that would otherwise use up the mana allotted to it, increasing its effect over time. Minus 2% cost and plus 1% spell damage per second per skill level. Joe marveled at the potential this skill offered. If he maintained his shadow spike for 10 seconds, it would gain an extra 2 points of damage. Or was it 1% of the current total? That would mean that after 10 seconds, it would do 52 points of damage. Not great when he was hiding his class, true, but this was exactly what he needed in order to boost his mana manipulation and coalescence. Holding Shadow Spike active would burn through 15 mana per second. Even with his mana regen, he could only hold the spell for roughly 40 seconds before he was tapped out. Would holding the spell for that whole time cause the damage to be 800 per second? Or would that add 4 damage to the spike right now? He had to test this. What about even at the beginner level? Channeling would either add 1 damage per second or 10 per second. He didn't have the mental skills to add up the possible damage at the higher levels. But this was certainly an ability he would be working on. Finding a fresh fox to attack, he channeled his spell into it. His math had been really wrong. Joe had, for some reason, seen 1% or 1 as 10%. It was 1% it was fine. The results were good, even if he would have been failing basic math right now. He just couldn't kill a dragon over 10 seconds, as his dreams had foretold. It seemed that the damage accrued as the current total, and after checking the combat logs, he was again happy with the new skill. The first second did 20 damage, then 20.2, all the way to his current maximum of 29.5. Altogether, this single spell did 977 damage at full power. Now all he needed to do was figure out how to make a live enemy hold still for 40 seconds as it took damage. Too excited to spend more time grinding foxes for minor bits of experience, he started walking back to town. Though his class ability of dark vision meant that his sight wasn't inhibited, it was just evening and the shadows were thickening, so he didn't think Tiona would mind too much. Distracting himself from the boring travel, he looked at how much experience he had gained. He had killed 32 foxes, netting himself 256 experience. Not bad at all. As the gates came into sight, Joe screeched to a halt and quickly set his class back to cleric. Whew, that was close. He almost... Joe, a guard called out to him, startling him enough that he almost dove to the ground to avoid an assumed attack. Joe, got a job for you. Captain wanted me to let you know that we have a couple people in the slammer. Cut each other up real good, but if they die, their families will start a blood feud. Head on over if you want to help prevent a civil war. He sent a wink at Joe, implying that he was exaggerating a little bit. Will do, thanks. Anything you gents need before I head on in? Joe smiled at the guards, always on the lookout for reputation gains. Sure, the guard standing on the other side of the gate called. I hear you are good at fixing up people who, celebrated a bit too much before duty. Joe looked at the guard, and under his helmet, he could see the poor guy squinting and sweating. Joe snorted, then cast Cleanse on the hungover protector of the people. Just as he was about to call it good, a flash of inspiration caught Joe, and he attempted to channel more mana into the spell. Was it only good for mage spells? It worked. A stream of water connected the two men, rushing from Joe's hand into the veins of the startled guard. The spell cut itself off after a short while, much to Joe's surprise. The guard seemed to stare into the distance for a moment, then broke into a happy grin. I've never seen this buff before. It allows me to have 10% gain on strength and dexterity-related skills for the next 2 hours. What? The other guard yelped. I want it too. What is the buff called? Looks like well hydrated. The first guard had looked at his status to read the name off. I feel really good. Can I have it too? The second guard implored Joe. Sure thing, but then I need to go heal those guys in jail. Joe channeled water into him, then hurried to the jail. He was excited that he could now force people to have the proper amount of water in them. What his drill sergeant wouldn't have given for this ability. Joe! Joe turned as he saw the captain approaching him across the training grounds. I need you to heal. Lead the way. I heard they're in a bad way, Joe called back, not slowing his pace. The captain nodded, easily matching Joe's jogging speed, which anyone else would have called a casual stroll. Joe's stamina was dropping swiftly, but he wasn't at the point of puking just yet. This is a bad situation, Joe, the captain explained seriously as he opened the door to one of the cells. These two are from noble houses, and if they have killed each other, we will likely have a civil war on our hands." "He was serious?" Joe muttered in shock as he remembered the cheeky wink the guard had sent his way. "He still made me hydrate him?" The captain pulled open the door. "Heal this one first, and we will move to the other right after." There was a young man on the substandard bed, laying in a slowly growing pool of blood. Joe hurriedly moved over and cast Lay on Hands, channeling the spell so that he didn't need to wait 3 seconds between casting it again. Joe had no idea how much health this man had and was surprised when he wasn't at full health in 8 seconds. By channeling, he had already restored 330 health. But the man's wounds were still gruesome. At 250 mana already spent, Joe was concerned that he may not be able to heal the other person at this rate. As the last wounds finally closed, Joe got a notification that mana manipulation had increased to Novice 3. His distraction made him miss the moment when the man's eyes snapped open, and a glowing fist sent Joe into the stone wall. Joe was stunned as the man roared and charged him, and 2 swift punches later, Joe got a series of messages that made him groan in frustration. 30 health, Empowered Strike. 15 health, Impact Damage. 20 health, Basic Attack, Undying Robes. Passive effect activated, health set to 1. 20 health, Basic Attack. You have died. 800 experience lost. Time till respawn, 8 hours. Maybe don't hang out with violent prisoners. That was a huge loss of experience. Joe found himself back in the virtual reality loading room, and with a sigh, he decided that it would at least be a good chance to check in with his mom, making lemonade out of lemons and whatnot. Chapter 20. Spending the remainder of his time doing research on the components for rituals he could use, Joe was unsurprised to gain a notification as he respawned. Ritual magic has reached Beginner's 0. Congratulations on finally understanding the most rudimentary concepts of rituals. You are now able to substitute components with others without the ritual automatically failing. Make sure you choose what to replace carefully. Based on your usage of rituals to this point, you are able to use excessively expensive components 10% more efficiently. So the respond room counted for abilities like this, huh? What did this notification mean by excessively expensive materials? Joe looked at his character sheet, spitting to the side when he noted that he now needed about 3,600 experience to reach the next level. He had been gone for 16 hours in-game, so he walked back toward the jail in the pre-dawn darkness. He hoped against hope that he would still be able to save the other person in the jail. But seeing the grievous wounds of the first, it was unlikely. Arriving at the jail, he was waved inside, but the captain walked over, shaking his head. "Too late to save the other. I'm so sorry about this. I had no idea the prince would wake up swinging like that. I should have taken more care, had a couple guards in there with you. This shouldn't have happened." The captain seemed to be a defeated man. Black circles were slowly growing under his eyes, and it was obvious that he hadn't slept at all since the last time Joe had seen him. "By the abyss, do I hate being the cause for casualties in good men. It isn't your fault, Captain. I should have been on guard. He got that way because of a fight, yeah." Joe instantly tried to calm the man. "So that was the prince. Did I say that?" The captain's eyes bulged. "You didn't hear that from me or my men, got that? Say nothing at all about the Baron dying." He winced again and slapped a hand over his mouth. Sure. Joe placated him cautiously. "I guess nothing else for me to do here?" "No, not now. I'm sorry it turned out this way, but I'll make sure you get some reparations from the royal family." You did save a prince, and he killed you for your troubles. That and knowing what you know. And since they can't keep you dead. Got it. Thanks, Cappy. I won't be able to sit around and wait for gifts that may not be coming. But let me know if you need anything else. Joe tried out a new nickname and, getting no negative feedback, decided to keep using it. After that travesty, you are still willing to help us? The captain's head dipped down and he let out a deep breath. On behalf of my men, I thank you again. We will be more dutiful in the future. Reputation gained, 1,000 pounds with human guards. New reputation, rank gained. You are now considered an ally of human guards. New opportunities become available to you in the future, and guards will often look the other way if you need them to. Abusing this may have negative consequences. Guild reputation gained, 100 with human guards. New opportunities have opened for your guild. Joe nodded at the captain and walked back to his guild. He walked into the barracks and was met with crying and sobs of pain. His eyes widened as he took in the seriously wounded people laying on the floor and tables. What in the world happened in here? Tara was the only person he could see that was on her feet. She walked over, a thunderous expression on her face. "Where the hell have you been?" she hissed at him. "I got killed by a person I was healing. They woke up and slaughtered me," Joe informed her, already healing the worst cases he could see. Almost all of the people were missing chunks of flesh, mainly fingers, hands, or feet. Their body parts were next to them, and his healing spell allowed him to reattach the tissue and nerves without issue, though the bones would need to heal naturally. He shuddered in remembrance of his own loss of limbs, and was happy all over again that he could heal these people. What happened? Monsters, Tara grimly informed him. They were some kind of leech-looking thing. They slithered in or were already here. We don't know. For some reason they couldn't get very high off the ground, but they tore off anything that dangled off a bed. No one even noticed at first because they seemed to inject some kind of a painkiller. Then a couple members started to bleed to death, and since Tiona's an officer, she noticed in the guild members tab that they were dying. The monster under the bed is real here. Joe shook his head. That's disgusting. It's called a tenebris, made for good experience, since they don't move very fast. They are mainly just effective against unaware people. Tiona's voice preceded her as she stomped into the room. I saw that you died. Care to explain? I really can't. Beyond telling you that a prisoner woke up after being healed and killed me. I was completing the ongoing quest with the guards. Got a ton of reputation for the guild, too, Joe told her. Wisdom +2. The notification made him sweat. Obviously, he had just done something the system considered very wise. How badly could that have gone for him? Tiona grunted at his explanation, noting the lack of details for a private conversation later. Give me a few minutes and I'll be able to finish up here. Healing so many people in rapid succession brought him a level in lay on hands, but not heal. There seemed to be some sort of block there that he wasn't approaching correctly. He was very interested to notice that using lay on hands brought experience to the main skill, and remembered that the notification when he first got the variant had told him it would do so. He supposed that could be true for many different skills where the skill variation was a branch of the main. Maybe smithing had specific sub-skills for things like weapons or armor. It would make sense that leveling those would level the main skill while making the variation more potent for the specialized skill. Master smiths usually focused only on either weapons or armor, right? Some even on just one or two types of weapon. Joe shrugged off these thoughts as he finished healing the last person in the room. They had waited very patiently, and he thanked the man before noticing that he had simply logged off while waiting. He snorted. Must be nice to ignore pain and come back ready to play. "What's the plan for the day, Tyona?" Joe asked as he washed blood off of his hands and robe. "Hey, the others are at work. Mundane in the real world. You know how it is." Tyona shrugged and stretched. Obviously, she hadn't slept much. "Just go do whatever you need to get done. They'll be back tomorrow from our perspective. Late afternoon for them." "Works for me." Joe had plenty that he wanted to get done. "Joe?" A tentative voice called warily from the front room. "There's a royal guard outside looking for a Joe. Any Joe in here?" A bit confused, but assuming he knew why the man was here, Joe walked to the door and met the most intimidating man he had ever had the displeasure of meeting. He was bald, near 6.5 feet tall, and had a series of scars on nearly every bit of exposed skin. His stare bore into Joe from a point 2 feet higher than the cleric's perspective, and it seemed that the man was judging every aspect of Joe's being. Releasing a grunt, the man reached into a spatial ring, pulled out a package and tossed it at Joe. After ensuring that Joe had the package in hand, the man turned on his heel and marched away at a speed Joe couldn't sprint at. There was nothing special about the box that he could see, but he still decided against opening it in the street. Shrugging off the curious looks from his guild mates, Joe went to the small room he was assigned, closing and locking the door before prying open the unassuming box. He was glad he had taken the precautions. A bright light shone throughout the room, and Joe had to look away, blinking. He squinted his eyes and touched the item within. Flawed greater core found. "Would you like to convert this into experience points? Current worth, 5,000 experience points. Yes or no?" Joe's mouth dropped open, and he could do nothing for a long moment, but stare at the light coming from the palm-sized stone. The emitted radiance forced him to look away as his eyes teared up. But after a moment, he was able to start thinking again. Should he use it, or should he save it? He could be at the next level now, or maybe he could find a better use for it. Joe considered his options, but as much as he wanted to save the core, he knew that he would start getting the real benefits of his class at level 5. If this was a gift, he knew it wasn't unique. There would be other cores out there. He grinned as he pressed the yes button. Golden light flooded out of him as the stone vanished, and he was jerked into the air as his level increased. Feeling a rush of energy, Joe landed softly on his feet with a joyful smile. Already there were people knocking on the door, shouting questions at him. They had felt the relaxing shockwave of a level increasing and wanted to see if there was something to fight in the room. He pushed the door open, a surprisingly difficult feat with so many people crowded into the area, and tried to explain the situation by saying that he had simply finished off a quest and it had given him enough experience to level up. A few people pressed the issue, but he refused to say much more, telling them that one of the requirements of the quest was that he couldn't discuss it. Since this was a surprisingly common theme in quests, all they could do was grumble and meander away. Joe sat down on his bed with a happy grin covering his face. He looked at his character sheet and noted with glee that his profession was now unlocked. Focusing on that section, he brought up a small selection of the professions he already had available to him. You may choose one profession at the 5th level and another at level 10. It is recommended that you choose a gathering profession first to gain the materials needed for the next profession you choose. Not all possible professions are shown here, only those you currently qualify for. Seek out a teacher or meet the requirements in order to unlock more options. Occultist, a seeker of the greatest truths, often scorned for their belief in what others believe to be conspiracies and fantastical tales. Ironically, many have spent their lives seeking out the knowledge that the occultist can readily access. For others of lesser professions, the terrible truth has sometimes been too much to bear. The occultist has no such qualms when it comes to knowledge. Nothing is forbidden. Nothing is too horrific to turn them from their path. For better or for worse, the occultist will seek even a grain of truth in any matter which intrigues them. Profession benefits at first level can attain quests from non-quest-related books, if there is truth hidden in the text. Lies and truth are visually discernible when in written form. Gains skills from scholar profession unless true profession is discovered. Profession title appears to be scholar. Devoting their lives to understanding the mysteries of the world, scholars apply the scientific method to all things. Often the very best at their field of study, the scholar is an asset to anyone seeking to become stronger. Though considered weak by others, scholars have been known to defend themselves in ways that none can explain, and in their sanctuaries, the prospect of fighting them borders on suicidal. Profession benefits at first level, increases speed of reading and writing by 50%, ability to add lore skill to any skill that could benefit from the area of study. For example, a scholar who studies metallurgy could add their lore skill to the creation of a weapon, increasing the quality of the item. Actor. This is the job for any who act in a way that is not true to their reality. While it does not offer many combat-related options, it is a profession used to great effect by bards, dancers, spies, assassins, thieves, and politicians. Profession benefits at first level, increased reputation gain with non-aligned factions, grants the disguise and persuasion skills, can hide alignment 75% more effectively. Tracker, steadily moving and searching for their target. Trackers use their high perception of the world to great effect. Hunters, trappers, bounty hunters, and investigators rarely lose their quarry, and this job offers them the best starting benefits of any option. Profession benefits at first level, grants the skill tunnel vision, which allows the tracker to see anything in the area that relates to their target 80% more effectively. Trackers move through rough terrain 50% easier than others. Herbalist, the study of botany and use of plants intended for medicinal purposes or for supplementing a diet. The herbalist can find rare and powerful ingredients needed by chefs, alchemists, and apothecaries. Whether to poison or heal, the herbalist can acquire the needed materials. Profession benefits at first level. Plants you harvest are 50% more potent for 7 days. All useful herbs have a faint pillar of light above them, can be toggled on/off. Joe was surprised at how many jobs he had available. He had thought that he would only have access to occultist. Some of the others were tempting, but he had been waiting to unlock his job since he started the game. For him, this was an easy choice. The fact that he was able to hijack the scholar's skills was just an added bonus. He selected the occultist job and accepted it. Joe waited for anything to feel different, but nothing happened. Checking his status sheet, he confirmed that he did indeed have the occultist profession. Joe felt a little let down. He thought that he would feel stronger, smarter, maybe. Regardless, this did change his original plans for the day. To the library, Joe walked toward the repository of knowledge, feeling light and free. He was an occultist now. As he walked into the library, he was humming and received a glare from Boris. Then, Boris saw Joe's level, and a flash of hope crossed his face. When he saw that Joe's profession was set as scholar, he released a strangled shout of joy. You did it! The first new scholar in nearly a decade. My boy, thank you. Our profession was dying, losing out to the mages for their direct power. Let me be the first to welcome you to the scholarly pursuits. Experience held back from completing footsteps through history. I has been awarded, plus 500 profession experience. Oh, that's right. You already earned these. Use them well. Boris handed over a small pair of spectacles, beaming all the while. Spectacles of the scholar. These half-moon lenses allow you to read for long periods of time without straining your eyes. They also help you to notice wear and tear on books and chase down anyone who damages a book's binding by setting it down on the ground upside down to hold their place. You'll be a librarian yet. Minus 25% eye strain from focusing on small details, plus 10% vision-specific perception. Interesting. Joe had never seen an item that only enhanced one of his senses at a time. Usually a perception bonus was applied uniformly, but he had to admit he'd rather not feel 10% more pain. So the spectacles were very welcome. Thank you. Is there anything else I can do in here, Boris? Any quests or texts I should read? Boris scratched his chin. Nope, not really. I don't know what you don't know, after all. You do have access to the first floor uncommon section now. But I'm sorry to say that your job level needs to be higher before you can go to a floor with rare books. Thanks. Oh, before I forget, how do I get the lore skill? Joe had half-turned before asking this, but his attention had now returned to the librarian. Lore. Boris chuckled fondly. Oh, it has been so long since I've needed to explain this skill. All you need to do is read up on a topic, think through how you can apply it to any given situation, and then do so. That'll unlock the skill. To forewarn you, lore is one of the few skills I know of that cannot have skill points added to it. Not to mention you have to level each lore skill individually. You can't just apply a study of one facet of creation to another without both being at high lore ranks. Study water? You get a lore skill. Fire, another lore skill. Try to combine them into a steam lore. Better have aerodynamics as a lore skill as well. You need to do actual learning, which is why people avoid that skill like the plague outside of our hallowed ranks. So lore isn't about history. It's a fancy way to say science? Joe watched Boris's eyes get wide, and he looked around swiftly. Basically, but don't go calling yourself a scientist, Boris whispered, forcing Joe to lean toward him. You will get laughed right out of the city or right into a jail cell. Scholars are scientists, founded by the First Order of Scientists in ancient times, back when science was almost useless due to magic being able to bend the natural laws to the breaking point. Now, with less people around able to use magic and magic becoming so specialized, well, we are coming into favor again, with the nobility at least. The common man, they tend to discredit science any chance they get, and the Mages College isn't helping. I'm not sure I understand. Joe withered under the glare sent his way. But I'll just take your advice and get to work then. Thanks again. Joe stepped into the stack of books, smiling as he saw a tome go flying through the air, only to settle gently in its correct spot. Even just looking at the covers around him made him smile. Thanks to his new abilities, all of the books were glowing. Chapter 21. Joe pulled the brightest, shiniest book he could find from a shelf, excited to see what was inside of it. To his horror, it was a book on simple mathematics, so the glow was not about how important the book was. Joe flipped through the book until he noticed a single dark spot. It took him a moment to realize the significance of the dark spot. But by adding up the numbers, he found that the provided answer was incorrect. So he was able to see at a glance how accurate the information contained in a book was. It made sense that a math book was almost perfectly true. Even if you could craft a spell to crack a world in half, 1 + 1 = 2. With a sigh, Joe put the book down and ignored it as it flew away. What would be the best use of his time, then? If he wanted to get and level the lore skill, he should focus on the books that were shining with correct information. There were a surprising amount of books that were dim, outnumbering the books filled with truth by 3 to 1, at least. So if he wanted to find magical artifacts, quests, and ways to get more powerful, his eyes jumped toward the fiction section. Myths, fairy tales, books others thought were just fun reads. Joe wandered over and began pulling likely books from the shelves, stacking them on the nearby table. He was glad that there was a note-taking interface in his character screen. Paper was fairly expensive to purchase in small amounts. He typed away at a keyboard which only he could see. Any onlooker would have found it very strange to see, since it seemed he was just wiggling his fingers in midair while flipping the pages of the book in front of him a few times. The data he could find was disjointed. There were nuggets of truth in these fictional books, but they didn't relate to each other in any real way. Before he could get frustrated after the 5th book, he found something interesting. This book had also reiterated some information that had been in the 2nd book, and together they started to form a slightly clearer picture. He kept going, able to ignore large portions of the text as he continued to write down only the true parts. Grouping all of these chunks together was similar to creating a jigsaw puzzle, and he found out more about his skill as he tried to piece the words together. When he put the information in an incorrect order, the words would dim. Placing them in the correct order would make them grow a bit brighter. He spent an hour trying to put a quest together with what he found. But his mind began to wander eventually. There simply wasn't enough information here. After a short break, he began parsing a few books about people who had used rituals in the past. Unsurprisingly, he started to ascertain that most of the contents were false. With a jolt, he remembered his own book of rituals and pulled out the upsettingly dark volume. Before he could continue going through other books for truth, Joe felt that he had no choice but to revamp his own grimoire. He opened to the page he had bookmarked and winced as he saw the ritual. The words were so dim as to be almost black, and he was unsure why. This ritual was the Little Sister's cleaning service, and he knew it worked correctly. Then why? Boris's words came back to him then. This is an exaggerated primer on rituals designed to show how inefficient, wasteful, and useless they are. Of course, the ritual would work, but Joe was likely using much more than he needed to in terms of mana and components. With a sigh, Joe stood and left the library. He went over to the nearby shops and placed a large gold piece on the counter as he bought a sheaf of paper. Joe grumbled a bit at the cost. A full gold had only garnered him 100 pages of blank paper. Next, he bought ink, quills, and finally a cup of coffee before returning to the library. Boris gave him the stink eye when he saw the coffee and made him drink it all before he was allowed near the precious books. Joe sat down again with a sigh, placing a single piece of paper on the table in front of him. The trader had explained all the uses of the items he had bought and had thrown in some drying sand and a quill sharpener for him, since he had purchased such high-valued items in bulk. Joe dipped his quill into the ink and began writing text as small as he could without letting the ink run together. Deciding to start with the Predator's territory ritual, he changed the values of the needed mana, components, and core. As soon as all the information was together on the page, he compared the now glowing information with his book. Several of the items were glowing brighter. Some were certainly dimmer. The question was, were the dim values dim because they were not needed? Had too small a value for the material, or were the wrong component entirely? He looked over the list of requirements: red pepper, wolfsbane, mint, crushed amethyst, pure salt, iron shavings, orange kyanite, 3 ounces of mercury, and silver wire, 900 mana investment, and an optional healing potion. Finally, blood and a core. Looking at it like this, it almost seemed like a recipe. Realistically, a recipe is exactly what it was and how he decided to treat it. Looking at his notes, he eliminated all the items that he thought had nothing to do with protection. Now the list only consisted of crushed amethyst, pure salt, iron shavings, orange kyanite, and silver wire. After writing that down, along with the symbol for the ritual, the information turned black. Obviously, this ritual would do nothing good if it was tried. He looked for more information on the other materials and found that mint was used to ward off rodents. Mercury was a symbol of change, and wolfsbane was a poisonous flower. He added these back in, and the information began to glow again. It took over an hour of replacing items, substituting in new material, and adjusting amounts before he got a recipe that glowed fairly brightly. It had taken 6 full pages of paper, and his hands shook with rage when he read the final formula. Ritual. Predator's territory. 80% maximum improvement. Uses wards against creatures, beasts, and monsters 10 levels above the genetic material used in the ritual. Caution. The inherent bloodlust generated by this ritual draws in any creature above the 10-level threshold. Components needed: 1/2 ounce dried wolfsbane, 1 ounce mint, 1/4 ounce crushed amethyst, 1 ounce pure salt, 5 grams of pure iron shavings, 1/4 ounce orange kyanite, 3 ounces of mercury, 1/10 of an ounce silver wire per square foot of space, and 1 drop of blood. 100 experience from a low-grade core and 400-point mana investment required. Lasts 8 hours. Joe had to physically sit down and breathe deeply to keep from screaming like a furious pterodactyl. He had wasted hundreds of experience points, mana, and coins on materials because someone had written this primer on rituals to discourage people from using rituals. He looked at the 6 pages of paper he had used to create this new formula and felt that paper was suddenly not a terrible investment after all. Skill gained. Ritual lore. Novice 9. Your study of rituals combined with your occultist profession has allowed you to greatly enhance a ritual that you found. Since you are already a beginner in ritual magic, this starts at a higher level than normal. Make a study of more and more powerful rituals to increase this skill. Effect: variable. Allows you to fine-tune rituals that you find or create. Can increase potency of rituals and or decrease costs of rituals. Skill increased. Ritual magic. Beginner 2. That may be the shortest skill increase message he has seen thus far. Joe was glad to see that he had gained a lore skill, and he was always happy to see his ritual magic skill increasing. He flipped to the next page in his grimoire and groaned. It was going to be a long day of adjusting rituals at this pace. When Joe wearily stumbled out of the library, he was exceedingly grumpy. It was already twilight, and his fingers were cramping from the constant writing. He was hungry, had ink all over his hands. But the saving grace of the day was the fact that he had changed at least half of the rituals in the grimoire to be usable. Sure, they were only the simplest rituals, but it was a start. He had also found that a few of the rituals were entirely bogus and were designed as traps to kill off anyone foolish enough to attempt them. He had found out that ritual magic was actually created by the symbols used, specifically the shape bounding it, like the double circle for predators' territory. If the components weren't properly in place, it would make the ritual spin out of control and place a mana debt on the person they could not hope to pay. Joe had received a taste of this with the ritual around the guild's barracks. But these symbols were on another level, a much higher level. Death was the most likely outcome from working outside of his capabilities. He had also found that the ritual would use all of the materials you intended for it to use, which explained why it would eat an entire core, even if it only needed 1/5 of it. Dang greedy magic. Might as well call it Dijkstra magic instead of ritual magic. Joe chuckled at the tiny programming joke he had made. It was funny to think of programming while in a world created by a supercomputer. Kinda like the opposite of metaprogramming. He shivered and tried to move past that thought spiral. This was his real world now. As he crossed over the red chalk circle around the guild, he stopped himself and shrugged. No reason not to activate it. The ritual had just become cost-effective. The chalk seemed to glow brighter for a moment before a timer appeared in his vision. 7 hours and 59 minutes remaining. Plenty of time to sleep. Joe went to the dining area and gorged himself on the stew that seemed perpetually available, told Aten that the ritual was active, and collapsed into bed. Long day. One dreamless sleep later, Joe popped out of bed with a smile on his face. The ritual had given everyone who slept here last night the well-rested bonus, and Joe was feeling it as total relaxation. Everyone he passed was chipper, and this was before the coffee was ready. Joe smiled as Aten sat down across from him. "Morning, boss man. How did you sleep?" "Better than I ever have since losing my 1,000 thread count Egyptian cotton sheets." Aten sniffed the aroma of fresh coffee wafting from the pot, moving toward them. "That because of your spell last night?" "Yeah, you can add in a health potion to get a well-rested bonus." Joe poured his coffee slowly, letting the potent smell wash over his face. Does the potency of the potion matter? "We have some apprentice alchemists that I'm sure would be willing to donate to the cause." Aten snatched the coffee pot from Joe the second his hand was off the handle. "I'm not sure." Joe thought about it, nodding as he thought it over. "Most likely, it'll just increase how long the bonus lasts. If that means I can feel this relaxed for half the day, though, I'll take it." Now, we did have a rotating guard last night, but weren't attacked or even looked at by the monsters that were running around out there. I'm real happy you had the forethought to activate your spell thingy last night. The city was attacked by, I think they were mutated bats. Nasty buggers, sharp claws, and a sonic attack. Aten shuddered a bit at the thought. I'm liking the thought of having your spell going pretty often, but the cost is just too... Joe waved his hand then to cut off the flow of words. He finished his gulp of black ambrosia and let out a contented sigh. Good stuff. The spell, it's called a ritual, actually. Well, I made a huge breakthrough yesterday. Turns out that I can refine the recipe of the spell a lot. I'm now able to get the spell cost down to not quite cheap, per se, but manageable. It went from a little over 30 gold to create 2. Doing a bit of mental math, Joe looked over the formula he had created. If the base ritual cost 100 experience from a core, for him it dropped to 50 experience. Just over 3 gold per 8 hours. Now it costs about 1/10 of what it did. Turns out that whoever made the spell book was intentionally trying to destroy anyone using them. 3 gold. A10 rubbed his stubble excitedly. You say it so casually, but going from $300 per use to $30 is pretty huge. These work anywhere? We could use them for overnight expeditions? Theoretically. But the big issue is creating a double ring of material to soak the magic into. I can't picture someone carrying around a huge sheet of paper or concrete with them. Joe shrugged uncomfortably. This was one of the major issues he was having, making his magic transportable. Does it matter what the rings are made of? A10 thought for a moment, after Joe shook his head. Can we talk to a weaver or tailor? Could we get a double ring of string, then roll it up after it is ready? Joe felt like his head was about to burst into flame, as hundreds of ideas were considered. Yes, yeah, that might work. Know anyone? Of course I do, A10 scoffed. I'll talk to them today, see if I can't get a few prototypes for you. Have a good day. I see Tiona coming this way. Huh. I made a rhyme. A10 wandered off and Tiona slid into the recently vacated space. Ready to go hunting, Mr. Level 5? Tiona grinned at him mischievously. Let's see if that level was earned or bought. Joe was forced to eat quickly, Tiona's stare not very conducive to a relaxing meal. They ambled over to the gate, discussing the plans for the day, while the other members of their team caught up to them. Joe was heatedly explaining why he couldn't just use Shadow Spike continuously to Tiona. Look, it is a non-class skill. Right now it's only at Novice 2, and it sucks almost 100 mana per cast. I can use it 4 times before I'm wiped out. You know, I hear Mage is a fun class. Tiona prodded him. Why don't you go get a mage license and switch classes? You'd keep your healing skills, right? No idea. Also, I'm not going to go drop 1,000 gold so that some random group is fine with me using my own spells. Joe ground out. It turned out that the Mages College would hunt down anyone using mage abilities if they weren't a certified mage. That way, they were able to keep tabs on anyone growing in strength, or as they called it, causing trouble. Joe was almost positive that it was simply a way to stay in power and in control. Anyone who came to their attention and didn't comply with their demands eventually gained the title Rogue Mage from them. Thankfully, it was not an actual title that was on your character sheet, but it was basically a bounty. Then that person tended to vanish, either from a natural accident or someone selling them to the college. Joe shook the dark thoughts from his head, trying to pay attention to his surroundings. They were almost to Fox territory now. Tiona was explaining some of her insights on leveling to the others. Going from level 9 to level 10 is just stupid hard. It is apparently going to be awesome at my next level, though. Because ranking up, specializing, whatever you want to call it, you know that euphoria from leveling? I was told it is that times 50. But gaining any levels at all after that point is going to be really hard, right? Guess spoke up, still a rarity in the group. I mean, going from level 9 to 10 costs, what, 14,000 EXP? Yup, Tiona replied cheerfully, and it just goes up from there. But your new class starts at level 1, so while your class is leveling up again, you are also gaining experience towards your overall level. Apparently, it isn't uncommon to get to level 20 and get your 4th specialization at the same time. At least, that's what I've been able to learn from the trainers. Seriously, I've never played a game where it is so hard to get levels, Dylan grumbled rhetorically. Chad piped up. Levels don't matter as much as skills anyway. What's the point in getting to level 10 and ranking up if you're stuck with a lame class because you didn't bother to get any skills? The others either shrugged or nodded, Joe included. I guess we'll just have to wait and see, right? Tiona changed the topic. Joe, did you remember to get the Wolfman Hunting Daily Quest? You are level 5 now. Joe froze in place, falling to the ground when Dylan stumbled into him with a curse. No crap. My first chance to... Relax, I'm messing with you. Tiona giggled at his expression. Here, I can share it with you. Her eyes lost focus, and a moment later, Joe had a pop-up blocking his vision. Quest alert, hunting the hunters, daily. The Wolfman population has been rising beyond any projections, and the human kingdom will be threatened by a horde of rampaging beasts if their population isn't brought under control. Hunt 10 Wolfman scouts, 5 Wolfman warriors, or 1 Wolfman shaman. Recommended level 8. Accept? Yes or no? Joe accepted the quest and furrowed his brow as he thought about the meaning behind the prompt. So if we are only hunting scouts every day, does that mean the population of warriors and mages is shooting higher and higher? His words nearly made the others stop walking as they saw what he meant. This game had a way of twisting words to have multiple interpretations. Tiona was the first to speak. Well, shoot. Probably. I bet other groups are doing the same thing we are. I'll mention it to the guards that give out this quest. They might want to break it up into 3 separate ones, Dylan decided as they continued forward. Doesn't matter today, though. We aren't going to go hunt down an unknown enemy the first day that you get to gain experience. From a daily, Joe. Joe nodded appreciatively, and the group quieted down a bit. They were getting near to wolf territory, and the large canines were known for ambushing unalert prey. Chapter 22. Woof! Dylan barked into Guess's ear, causing him, the group still hadn't found out Guess's real gender, to jump in apparent shock after a moment. Joe chuckled. Since Guess was playing with an outdated VR helmet and mental keyboard, she must have manually pressed the jump button. Good sense of humor there. There is a group of wolves trying to sneak up on us, Chad warned the group as they strolled along. Joe, you want to take out the alpha, or should we fight them? They had discovered that if the largest wolf in the pack was killed before the other wolves attacked, the animals would scatter and run away. Tiona thought it over before shaking her head. We're in a hurry. Joe, take him. Joe grinned and turned his head. Easily finding the crouching wolves, he concentrated and made the required hand motion. A spike of pure darkness thrust upward, catching the alpha in its flank. It howled in pain, and Joe took the time to channel the spell, needing to hold the spike in place for a full 3 seconds until the wolf collapsed. The other wolves ran off just as planned. Phew! That guy had a lot of health in him. Nearly drained my entire mana pool to finish him off. Skill increase channeling has reached Novice 2. Mana manipulation has reached Novice 4. Joe really preferred these succinct messages. How long until you are back to full? Tiona liked data. The more she knew about her party, the better she could plan out combat. Let me check, Joe muttered, opening his character screen. Mana manipulation went up, so now I have 419 mana, but I just used 325 to channel that spell, so about a minute? 50 seconds. Too long for anything but an ambush. Tiona looked around, scouring the underbrush for hidden foes. Sure, there aren't other things attacking us right now, but in the future, if you run out of mana like that, we might get wrecked. Feel free to do that if we need you to. But remember that if we are going to have a longer battle, you have to make sure you conserve your mana. That means no channeling spells at the start of the fight. Let that be a finishing move if you really feel the urge. Yes, ma'am. Joe saluted her with mocking precision. Sighs. Dang straight. Good to see you finally know who's in charge. Tiona winked at him. her analytical side softening as she remembered that this was supposed to be fun. The others chortled as they began moving again, and Joe's focus turned inward as he tried to squeeze his mana into a smaller container as it refilled. He hadn't made any real progress with his coalescence skill, but he wasn't overly surprised. After all, it was written right in the skill description that he needed a higher willpower to gain levels in the skill. Joe wasn't sure he believed that, though. Practice and determination had served him well through the years. He wasn't going to stop progressing because some skill description gave him arbitrary boundaries. His mana finished refilling without him gaining a rank in the skill. Joe crossed his arms and pouted a bit. The group had to carve a path through a small pack of wolves once or twice, but they finally reached Wolfman territory, trying to be stealthy. They watched the first group they came across for a few moments. Their stealth failed them as one of the wolves on the fringe of the patrol suddenly snapped its head to face them and released a growl. Not overly surprising, Tiona lamented as she tightened the grip on her sword. Animals must have boosted perception. Unsurprisingly, this includes wolves. Chad, Joe, try to take out the scout. Joe, if we get injured, break off your attack and heal. Everyone else get ready for battle. 3, 2, 1, Chad called softly, letting loose his bowstring just as Joe finished his spell. A spike of shadow lanced into the scout's lower back, causing it to freeze as pain overwhelmed its senses. Before its reflexive paralysis faded, an arrow lodged itself in the wolfman's eye. Crumpling to the ground, the humanoid body quickly stilled. The basic wolves stumbled to a halt, looking back at their fallen leader, and scattered with high-pitched whines. The wolfman is considered the alpha, then? Guess accurately inferred. Looks like it. Thank goodness. Dylan let out a long sigh of relief. I need some better armor. All I can think right now is I'm so glad I didn't get bitten again. Not the best mentality for the guy planning on taking all the hits, you know? Howls in the distance heralded an unfortunate side effect of having allowed the other wolves to run off. A notification then blocked their views for a long moment. Area quest. Territory dispute. Wolfman scouts have found wolves without a pack and are converging on the location of the missing scouts' patrol. Survive against their fury. Reward. Variable. 1 class-related item. Rounds survived. 0 out of 5. Territory dispute? As if. Tiona scowled at the notification blocking her view as if trying to frighten it into changing its verbiage. This is a stupid survival quest like that rabbit swarm. Here they come. Dylan's voice wavered as he raised his shield. This is gonna hurt, dang it. Stupid team, needing a tank. His voice trailed off into incoherent grumblings, but his stance reflected perfect defensive discipline. Guest looked around at the team members who were getting into formation and putting their backs to a tree, and vanished into a nearby shadow. Tiona was about to give a few orders, looked around, and snorted. Rogues, guess you better just be getting into position or I'm going to cut you in half. The first of the wolves exploded through the underbrush, only taking a moment to lock its eyes on the party before snarling and charging them. Before making it halfway, half a dozen more canines began hurtling into the open. Arrow after arrow launched from Chad's bow, finding new homes in fur and flesh. The first wolf died, but the others simply increased their pace. Chad continued attacking, but was knocked to the ground as a scout made its presence known by returning fire. Chad screamed as the barbed head of the arrow tore into his bicep, and he was forced to stop attacking as the arm went limp. Joe was the only member of the team with ranged attacks, and his hands quickly formed his only offensive spell. The shadow of the wolfman bunched up and slid into the scout soundlessly. The wolfman screamed in pain as it fell. It wasn't dead yet, but Joe needed to turn his focus to Chad. He gripped the arrow, knowing this part would suck. With a sharp pull, the arrow, a chunk of meat, and a spray of blood came from the fallen man. Chad shrieked as Joe grabbed the tender area, applying his healing spell as accurately as possible. In moments, skin was closing over newly grown tissue. Chad nodded with tears in his eyes, leapt to his feet, and began firing arrows once more. His attacks were much more carefully targeted now. Scouts were his main focus. Leaving the four-legged variety to his teammates, Chad put an arrow into any wolf standing on just 2 feet. Dylan was screaming in rage and pain as he waded through the wolves attempting to drag him to the ground. "Not this time, you mangy beasts! I am going to cut you!" He punctuated his sentences with slashes or bashes, using his shield as much as his sword. With his grumbling curses drawing the animals' attention, Tiona was able to deal maximum damage. Her sword flashed amongst the combatants, leaving behind huge gashes and crippled opponents. As the last wolf fell, Dylan stood on wavering legs. Just before he would have collapsed, Joe's hand landed on his shoulder and began pouring healing water over the stocky tank. Dylan shook his head, his mind able to function properly again, as savage bite marks rapidly vanished from his body. A scout thudded to the ground, falling from its sniping position in the branches of a tree it was planning to ambush them from. Guess landed on the anthropomorphic wolf, using it as a landing pad as her presence was once again known. 3 wolfmen, well 4 with this one, and about 16 wolves in that wave. Territory dispute. Rounds survived, 1 out of 5. Experience deferred. Deferred? Joe asked as he noticed that everyone else was also getting the notification. You get the experience when you either finish the quest or die, Tiona told him as she prepared herself for the next wave. That way, you can't level up mid-battle and get fully restored. Well, that sucks. Dylan's grumbles started up again. He was looking over his wolf leather armor, which was becoming heavily tattered. At least I'll have plenty of materials to repair this with after the battle. The next wave progressed in a similar manner, the only real scare being when a wolf used one of its comrades as a springboard and was able to tackle Dylan to the ground. Luckily, this was near the end of the wave, and Joe was able to restore him from only a few health before the next wave began. Territory dispute. Rounds survived, 2 out of 5. Experience deferred. This time something was different. Instead of wolves charging them, a storm of arrows and thin javelins began to whiz through the underbrush. Dylan laughed as his stout shield vibrated from the impact of the projectiles, his reaction time good enough that none of them landed in his body. Joe, Chad, and Gessus were the main damage dealers this round, as they needed to seek out the archers and end them from a distance. Joe was able to eliminate 2 of the scouts on his own, then finished off 1 scout who had 3 arrows protruding from his stomach. Not seeing any open wounds on his teammates, Joe was surprised as Chad suddenly fell to his knees, gasping. Looking him over, Joe noticed black lines that had crept up Chad's arm. He swore softly, only now remembering that scouts were known for using poison on their arrows. Activating Cleanse, he channeled the spell and worked to expunge the high-leveled poison from his teammate. It was difficult to do, but with his higher understanding of the spell, higher skill level, and the bonus power from channeling, he was able to rid the toxins from the archer's bloodstream. Skill increased. Cleanse. Beginner 0. Congratulations, you have increased your skill enough that you understand the basic concepts. Since you mainly used this skill to remove poisons and toxins during the novice rankings, Cleanse now has a 10% bonus effectiveness against poison and toxins in the human body. A piercing scream rang out from the final scout as Guess succeeded in backstabbing it, and it fell to the ground from a branch above them. Quest complete. Hunting the hunters. Daily, 10 out of 10 Wolfman scouts have been slain by your party's actions. Return to the quest a senior for any monetary or item rewards. Experience gained. Deferred. Territory dispute. Rounds survived. 3 out of 5. Experience deferred. Joe tried to help Chad to his feet, but as he pulled the archer upward, his strength modifier made him fail, and he fell down on top of his surprised teammate. Sorry. Joe was flushed with embarrassment. Seriously, though, I need to put a couple points into strength and constitution. This is getting stupid. Joe, get your mind in the battle, Tiona called out as the next wave began. A few arrows arced toward them, but Chad had already regained his feet and returned fire instantly while dodging the missiles. The real trouble appeared as a trio of wolf men stepped out of the forest, heavy machetes and thick leather armor marking them as vastly different from the creatures they had fought thus far. Joe stared intently at the new threat, attempting to pull up some information on them. Successful perception check, Wolfman warrior, after standard training and months of hardship. Extra strong wolfmen are given their first weapons and armor. The more metal they have on them, the more elite the force. A wolfman fully clad in metal armor and wielding a metal weapon is an absolute elite and a force to be reckoned with. Average level is 8. Perception +1. After staring intently, almost lovingly, into the eyes of your foe, your perception has increased to the point that you can attain general knowledge of him. Gain more insight into your enemies to advance your understanding of their being. These guys are at least level 8, everyone. Joe was surprised by how calm his words sounded. Realistically, he had no idea if he would be effective against this type of enemy. Finally, a worthy challenge, Tiona stated dryly, her face coated in sweat as she tried to catch her breath. The 3 warriors loped toward them, fury in their gaze as they raised their weapons. Chapter 23. Joe, can you slow one of them down? Dylan questioned in a quiet voice. I can't hold against 3 at once. Looking over his teammate with a searching stare, Joe saw that he was about to break. I'll do my best. His mana reserves were almost full, since healing cost him almost nothing right now. Joe targeted the Wolfman warrior that was in front, leading the charge. Joe's hand moved in a specific pattern, and the shadow of the wolf lanced upward into the unprotected shin of the sprinting soldier. There was a disturbing crack of bone as the shin bent around the spike, the force of the running warrior causing the bone to split vertically. Howling, the leading warrior dropped to the ground, weapon flying from his hand. The others ignored him as they continued their assault. Joe wanted to finish off the fallen wolfman, but the others clashed with Dylan, and Joe had no attention to spare. Their attacks were unrefined, brutal, but effective. Dylan blocked 3 strikes before his shield shattered, but he managed to lash out and open the gut of the rightmost attacker. The wolfman whimpered as his intestines saw light for the first time, but continued attacking weakly until all his movements stopped. Tiona dashed in and parried a blow that should have caught Dylan in the neck, leaving the wolfman open to a backstab from Guess. The wolf stiffened as another blade slammed into him, and an arrow slid between his ribs through a gap in the leather armor. Dylan gasped, dropping to his knees as he took a deep breath, cradling his broken arm as the pain finally reached him. He smiled through the pain, happy they had survived the wave.
"Guys, I really think we—"
Blood poured from Dylan's torn throat as he looked uncomprehendingly at the warrior that had fallen with a shattered leg. The canine bared its teeth in a horrifying snarl before the others managed to put various weaponry into its body. Party member Dylan has fallen. Experience loss halved due to quest deferring experience gains. Look for him as the sun rises over the eastern horizon. Territory dispute. Rounds survived, 4 out of 5. Experience deferred. Damn it, no. Tiona dropped next to Dylan, trying to find any signs of life, even though they had all already gotten the notification of his death.
"Dylan, I'm so sorry.
We weren't ready to push into this area, and you told me you didn't want to tank. Snap out of it, Tiona," Chad called angrily. "He'll be back tomorrow, and you can feel bad for yourself then. The last wave is starting." The brush rustled ominously, and all of the humans prepared themselves. Joe frantically channeled cleans into Tiona, granting her the well-hydrated buff just before the battle started. Out of the forest walked an extra-large wolf man, and the light reflecting from his polished armor caused Joe to blink a few times. A thick bastard sword was held in a single hand as the elite warrior glared at them and looked around at the bodies that were already beginning to rot. A dark rumble grew in its chest, transforming to a howl as it charged them. Twice as fast as the others, the elite warrior crossed the distance in a flash. Joe cast Shadow Spike as the wolfman closed in on Tiona, but its eyes shifted to him, and Joe could see the beast's eyes dilate. As Joe finished the spell, the monster launched himself into the air. The spike appeared from the shadow, but the spell almost instantly collapsed. Not only had jumping taken the wolf out of range, his shadow had shrunk to a tiny circle on the ground, weakening the spell immeasurably. Cleaving downward with his huge sword, the wolf snarled as Tiona rolled out of the way of the ground-shattering blow. It took 2 incredibly quick pulls, but then the bastard sword came out of the ground with a spray of soil as the wolf continued his attack. The warrior rolled forward suddenly, and Guess appeared behind him, her daggers only scoring the metal armor as the beast dodged. A backhand caught Guess across the face, and the rogue went flying into a tree. A sound like hail was starting to annoy the wolf, and he glanced over to see Chad firing arrow after arrow into his armor. Targeting weak points, the archer was doing his best to inflict any damage at all, but failing miserably. With the wolf looking in his direction, Chad targeted his eyes. Simple movements of his head caused all the arrows to either miss the wolf man entirely or break against his helmet. Tiona roared as she swung her sword with both hands, catching the wolf man in the small of his back. He only stumbled forward, regaining his footing and turning to join the duel Tiona was offering. The huge sword flicked out, and it took all of Tiona's skill to deflect the blow, the force still causing her to stumble backward. She dodged the next 2 swings without trying to match strength with the beast. Locking eyes with Joe for a moment, she nodded slightly and charged forward. Joe channeled his shadow spike, the spike appearing at the wolfman's lower back just as an arrow impacted the back of his knee, causing it to buckle. Tiona's charge slammed the off-balanced wolfman into the spike, but to Joe's horror, the armor held. Guess re-entered the fray at that moment, and her daggers bashed the wolf just hard enough for the armor to give way with a squeal. The tip of the channeled spike slid into the humanoid slowly, the wolf not able to recover his balance as Tyona and Guess dodged his frantic attacks and applied their own. With a sickening squelch, the spike exited the front of the wolf and was stopped by the undamaged breastplate. The warrior struggled valiantly for a few more moments before falling to the ground as Joe ran out of mana. It twitched a few times, then lay still. Joe dropped to the ground, gasping as his body slowly began regenerating his fully depleted power. Through his breaths, he looked with great curiosity at the new notifications that were allowed to appear. Quest complete, territory dispute, rounds survived, 5 out of 5, experience increased by 50%, 25% bonus for being the first to find this event, 25% bonus for completing it on the first attempt. Experience 2,000. Item gained, class-specific item box. This small treasure box holds an item only useful to you or someone with the same class as you. Guard it well. Joe slowly sat up as he felt his body starting to recover from the intense battle. Everyone was sitting, faces and bodies covered in dirt, blood and sweat. He muttered, "I bet we all have the stinky debuff right now." For some reason, the others seemed to think this comment was hilarious and started chuckling. In a moment, the chuckles turned to full-on laughter. They slowly stood, aching all over, and began to loot the bodies. Most of the clothes were tattered rags, but the leather armor and metal weapons could be sold for a fairly good price. The real prize was the heavy metal armor worn by the Wolfman Elite. They stripped the gear off of him, ignoring the horrid stench coming from his ruptured organs. When the team found that they couldn't carry both the armor and the loot, Joe decided to tell the others about his new spatial ring. There were a few twitching eyes, but no one said anything as he stored the thick armor in the ring. "It's totally full right now," Joe explained as Tyona asked him to put the other loot in the ring. "It's not a huge capacity. Really, just enough for all my spell components and, well, a set of armor, I guess." "What?" Guess looked over at them. "I said, I guess. I wasn't calling you." Joe rolled his eyes. "Ah." Guess went back to watching for danger. "All right." Tyona sighed heavily. "You know, the more you hide stuff like this from us, the less likely it is that we can fully trust you." "I wasn't hiding it, really." Joe felt a bit upset about her assertion. "You just can't really use it, so there was no reason for me to bring it up. It would just seem like I was bragging." Tyona looked away, then addressed the others. "Good job today. Check to see if Dylan dropped anything, and let's get the heck out of here. I'm totally beat right now." "Mitya mami." They set out for town, and Joe checked the other notifications that had been blinking in the corner of his vision. Experience, 496, combination of multiple creatures. See full listing, yes or no? Joe selected no. He knew what monsters he had fought today. He didn't need to go over it again. It was only early afternoon when they approached the gates, but it felt like it had been a week. He was indescribably interested in the class item box that he was carrying in his storage ring, but he couldn't open it for fear of the others finding out what it contained. What if it shouted, "Ritualist class item," when he opened it? Sure, it was unlikely, but games had done stranger things in the past. The trail back was quite the trudge with how exhausted they all were, but the thoughts of a relaxing bath and a hot meal were a powerful draw. Joe's need to maintain a fairly slow pace made the others huff with annoyance by the time they were halfway back. At this point, Chad and Guess started playing tag in the trees. jumping from branch to branch with the excellent agility their class afforded them. Tiona would get a bit ahead of Joe, then do push-ups until he was past her. Joe's face soured when she would run past him and try to beat her previous record. Now he was missing the slow, stealthy pace they needed to use when going through hostile territory. Never had Joe been so happy to see the city gates. He ignored the others in his team, and they laughed at his aloof countenance as the party disbanded. Waving at each other, they went their separate ways. Even Joe muttered a fond farewell, knowing that they were only teasing him to ease the tension of the day. He skidded to a stop as he remembered that he was carrying the armor they intended to gift to Dylan. Looking around frantically, he saw that the others were gone. They must have forgotten about the armor and the repairs it needed. He rolled his eyes, knowing that he needed to take care of this before starting to relax. Joe walked into the trade district and was surprised with how long it took to find directions to a reputable armor smith. The characteristic sound of metal on metal and tear-inducing smoke from the forge was nowhere to be found. Worried that the smithy in the area would only be a storefront, he was much relieved to walk in and see a man pounding soundlessly on an anvil. "Hello, I have some armor that I need work on." There was no response to Joe's words. The man just kept hammering away, getting a bit frustrated after repeated attempts to get the man's attention. Joe looked around and noticed a bell on the counter. He went over and rang it, and the man at the anvil looked up with a startled expression. Setting down the hammer and metal he was beating on, the man walked over with a neutral expression on his face. "Yes? Sorry. There's a sound barrier in that room. Can I help?" "No. Get out. I don't sell any kind of mage armor or weapons. In fact, I'm not a huge fan of the college. I work with metal here. I don't have anything light enough for whatever class you are supposed to be." Joe looked down at his stick-thin body, a bit perplexed. He hadn't gotten a response like this before, and he wasn't sure how to handle the situation. I'm not here for armor for myself." "Oh, that's a relief." The smith grinned and wiped his bald head. Sorry about that. Thought you might be an undead at first. Skeleton, ghoul, or some such. Since you can talk, I'll assume you are alive." Joe felt gobsmacked. How was he supposed to reply to casual insults like this? "So, what do you need, brother?" The smith had a large grin on his face now, eye twitching. Joe pulled the armor out of his ring. "I need this repaired and resized for a human-sized warrior. Is that possible?" The man looked over the gear with a critical eye, and when he got to the gaping hole, he raised an eyebrow and glanced at Joe. "Your handiwork?" Joe nodded, and the smith grinned. "Nifty. Yeah, I can do it, but it'll be a couple days. Have the person in question come here so I can size it properly. Actually, why isn't he here right now?" Yeah? Well, not everyone was so lucky as to survive the process of acquiring this gear. He'll be back tomorrow, but until then, I just want to get the process started." Joe half-heartedly shrugged at the end of his explanation. "I see." The smith was silent for a long moment, looking at the oversized armor. "Say, I don't suppose you know what your friend is trying to accomplish. Class-wise, I mean. You said warrior. Can you be more specific? Heavy plate armor like this might not be the best for someone like a standard melee fighter. Well, he is gearing himself to become a tank, a guardian of sorts. Get the attention of the enemy and keep it while we finish them off." Joe tried to think of a better way to explain, but the smith was already wincing. Ooh. He is going to... You're letting him become a... Why do people do that to themselves? A regular warrior planning to be a tank. The smith shuddered. I can help him out a bit, perhaps. Are you certain this is his plan? I don't suppose you have some funds available you would donate to give him a better chance at survival. The smith was looking at Joe with a gleam in his eye. Joe grumbled, but said that he might be persuaded to help his friend out. The light in the smith's eyes turned almost rabid. Wonderful. He uses a shield, yes? Has he achieved shield mastery yet? He has a skill called that, if I remember correctly. Good, good. The smith started to gather the armor. Well, I'll add in the adjustments after I get him measured. He will be so happy. I'll make sure to tell him it is a gift from you. The smith wrote down a sum on a slate and left it on the counter. I'll need this much money. Thanks in advance. Joe looked at the amount on the board, and a muffled scream reached the smith's ears just before he crossed into his magically silenced room. There's no way I'm paying. The smith smiled as he began his new project. It was nice to have a challenge. Chapter 24. Joe watched the smith flee, and his hands tightened around the slate. If he had been able to bring any strength to bear, it would have shattered. With a snarl, he left the room and went over to the alchemist to see if he had restocked any cores. Joe left the building 60 gold poorer, but with 2 shining gems tucked into his ring. Making his way to the bathhouse, he cleaned up, had his clothes washed, and then went to dinner. Feeling like a brand new person, Joe retreated to his small room in the barracks. Finally, it was time to see what his reward from the item box was. The small chest sat on his bed, and after a moment, he flipped the lid open. A soft, golden glow filled the room, and a thin ring of metal with a long needle on one side appeared as the light faded. Joe touched and tried to inspect the item. Perception check succeeded. Item gained. Titanium taglock needle. Class item. Similar to taglock kits used by witches in voodoo magic, this is a reusable weapon augment designed to draw blood for rituals. One ritual can be bound to the needle, set to activate when blood is drawn. Stats: 80% armor penetration, adds 1 point of physical damage. Item type: augment. Rarity: rare. Durability: 1000 out of 1000. That was way more information than he had ever been able to see before. Thinking of the item's uses, Joe wasn't sure how to react at first. He didn't have any combat-related rituals, but he could certainly see how this could be useful in the future. Plus, an extra point of damage meant that he would effectively double his damage when hitting rabbits. The thought made him smile. He didn't actually think that was the best use for it, especially with 80% armor penetration. If he aimed for a weak point when someone was in plate armor, he could likely draw blood. Then, if he had the right ritual, the fight should be over. The need to find more and better rituals began to overpower Joe, but sadly, he had no leads on potential locations for them. He could try the Mages College, but he was certain that they would make demands on him that he wasn't willing to comply with. Just like any other university out there, they would try to charge him an arm and a leg, force him to participate in courses he didn't need, and essentially pledge loyalty to their ideals if he wanted to make any progress in his field of study. Joe grimaced at the thought. He had received so many calls asking for money from his old college after he graduated that he had needed to eventually get a new phone number, then change his email address and get a shredder for all of the junk mail. Reminding himself that this process was supposed to be fun, Joe shook off his morose attitude and thought about his new weapon augment. Pulling out his scepter, he slid the metal band around the head of the weapon and snapped the clasp closed. A few sparkles of light appeared around the weapon, but they faded after a moment. Looking at his weapon, he had to laugh. It looked like an odd-shaped baseball bat that someone had hammered a nail through. Comparing it to the glowing weapons and magical effects he had seen, this scepter looked like something a caveman would use. Joe swung his weapon around a few times, but there was no difference that he could feel. He shrugged. He would have to use it in combat eventually. He'd just need to wait a while. He couldn't think of anything else he needed to do, so he decided to just get ready for bed. Joe stretched out, made sure his door was locked, and laid his head on his pillow. Today had been kind of rough, and his tired mind gleefully accepted the chance for rest. A few hours of snoozing soundly drifted by, but around midnight, he was rudely awakened. Screams and sounds of battle began to ring out, replacing happy dreams of bashing bunnies. Joe jumped out of bed, unintentionally activating his skill, Jump Around. His body did a flip without prompting, and he landed gently on his feet, gagging from the sudden stamina drain. The blankets he had jumped out of swished and settled down, revealing a perfectly made bed. Joe did a double take at the room, but the screaming intensified, and he needed to get out there and help people. It was close to 3 o'clock in the morning, and the only light was either from fire or some form of magical effect. Only a second was needed to understand what was happening. They were under attack, not by monsters, but by people. They were wearing scarves and hoods to try and hide their faces, the style worn by only those who know they are intentionally doing wrong. Joe, even with his high perception, was having a difficult time tracking the movements of several of them, indicating that they were rogues with high stealth skills. Looking around, Joe saw that there wasn't anyone really injured. The invading force was making sure that whoever they attacked died. Making a snap decision, Joe changed his class to Mage and sent a shadow spike into a warrior that was rearing back to strike a fallen guild member. The spike shot up into a delicate area, and the warrior released a high-pitched scream. Joe's fallen guild member stood up and began stabbing the warrior, so Joe felt that he could turn his attention elsewhere. He glanced around at all the shifting shadows, seeing a rogue sneaking behind a small group of defending archers. Another shadow spike appeared, but there was a secondary effect Joe hadn't expected. As the shadows cloaking the rogue were pulled to a different task, the rogue seemed to be almost ejected from the darkness that had been protecting him. He tripped and fell to the ground, a new and large hole in him. The archers saw him appear, and the man was quickly filled with various feathered shafts. Seeing the results of pulling the concealing darkness from his foes, Joe began focusing his attacks on the hidden enemies. One after another, they fell to the Wanderers' Guild, and soon all that remained were the various warriors and archers that had broken in. They too fell swiftly, now that the guild was roused and the rogues causing chaos were defeated. A10 stalked over to a body, pulled off the mask, and tisked. "These are headshots, goons. Looks like the hardcores want another taste of pain. Spymaster, find where they are holed up." A10 looked around at the expectant faces and shouted, "Who comes for the Wanderers? The strongest, the best, we kill all the rest." A few of the guild members finished the chant that was becoming their guild motto. Joe had changed his class back to cleric by this point, and made his way around to the few injured people in the room. When he finished, he looked over the flashing notifications he had been ignoring. Skill increased, Shadow Spike, Novice 3, Playing with Darkness is paying dividends. No experience has been awarded for killing travelers, but as several of them had red names, they may drop money or gear. If they had removed all items before launching an unprovoked attack, money or items will appear, taken from their bank account. Eternia does not recommend attacking other players. Your guild has successfully held off an invading force that was attempting to assassinate your members. Due to your guild's high reputation with the guards of Ardenia, if all the enemies slain were from the guild hardcores, the city will launch an investigation into their activities. Depending on the results of this investigation, members of the guild hardcores may lose reputation, serve jail time, or have heavy fines levied against them. The guards are getting involved. Holy crap, look at that message. They're making the game mad with their shenanigans. About time. I need to be able to play the max amount I can. I quit work and am living off this game right now. A familiar voice mentioned. Joe perked up when he heard the last comment. Looking over, Joe saw that it was Tara who had spoken. He nodded. It made perfect sense that she could already live off her earnings. As the only battle mage, she made a good cut of any money found. As a guild officer, she earned a monthly stipend from the guild to play as much as possible. After ensuring there was no one else needing his services, Joe returned to bed. The next morning or later that day, depending on how you thought about it, Joe went to meet with Dylan after he respawned. He found him staring into a coffee cup, armor in tatters, and seeming to be a bit worse for wear. "Morning, Dylan. Doing all right?" "Huh? Oh." Dylan seemed startled to be spoken to, and when his eyes met Joe's, he had to look away. "Yeah, I'm good. Sucked to lose experience, but finishing the quests puts me ahead by a good margin. Got a nice little class item box, too." "Look, Joe, I normally don't mind being a tank. In other games, it is kinda whatever, you know? Here, though, I don't think I can." "Hang on, buddy." Joe gripped his friend's arm. In that moment, he knew he would pay whatever was needed for his teammate to have the protection he needed. "I've got a present for you. Come with me." Dylan seemed to struggle internally for a moment, but sighed and followed. They made their way to the smith, and Joe introduced his friend to the money-grubbing scumbag, that is, the smith who was going to fix up the armor and resize it. The smith looked Dylan up and down, nodding the whole time. "Now we're talking. Someone who can use proper gear. I hear you are walking the path of a defender." "Is this true?" "I'm trying. It's hard. I get hurt every single time." Dylan looked at the ground, clenching his fists. Something shifted in the smith's eyes and approval shone through. "Yet you continue to go with and protect them. Admirable. Not many can devote themselves to protecting others over their own well-being. Most warriors will go and fight, leaving their team to their own devices. I think you are someone I can really work with. Are you willing to devote yourself to the safety of others?" I want to. It just hurts so much," Dylan whispered as he continued his staring contest with the ground. An honest answer. Even better. The smith put a massive hand under Dylan's face and lifted his head so they could see each other. "I can give you the tools you need. Just tell me you will do your best to protect those in your care." Dylan gulped and nodded. "I will. I always do." A message appeared in front of Joe, making him stumble backward. He growled. Outside of combat and stressful situations, these messages were invasive, annoying, and were supposed to be blocked. Then he saw the content of the notification and smiled. Requirements for hidden class found. After suffering for his team, Dylan had reached a crossroads. Thanks to your direct actions, he has devoted himself to the protection of others and gained the hidden basic class, Bulwark, Rare. For finding hidden information, your deity has granted you 150 experience. Dylan was staring into space, the look someone got when checking notifications or their status. He blinked after a few moments and cracked the first smile Joe had seen from him today. The smith took a few measurements and told them to come back in an hour. Apparently, he would rush a job for a client who would use his work properly. Dylan looked over to Joe. "Did you know he would offer me a new class?" "No. I only came here so you could get measurements taken," Joe answered truthfully.
Can you tell me anything about your class?
Dylan got a faraway look again. "Huge bonus to defense, great knockback resistance, and I can use shields to attack without the normal penalties. I got a new skill right away. It's called Stand Behind Me. Lets me move at triple my normal speed to get in front of a party member and block an attack. Also, the smith told me he knows what I need for progression, all the way to the 3rd tier. I'll just need to prove that I'm using my abilities to protect others and do some work for him." "That's seriously awesome, man." Joe enthusiastically congratulated him. They talked for a bit longer, deciding to just wait the hour instead of leaving and coming back. When the smith entered the room again, Dylan seemed to tense up. The newly minted bulwark almost seemed ready to hyperventilate when his new armor was handed over. The smith instructing him to equip it. He calmed down quickly after the armor was on, and a huge grin appeared. "Joe, this armor is a class item now. It's only missing 2 pieces and it'll be a full set. I will have set armor." Set armor was gear that was made to work together perfectly, complementing all the other pieces. A full set was often better than having a couple of amazing pieces, because a full set usually came with a large bonus. "Well, if you want a full set, you're going to need to put these on." The smith grinned as he pulled 2 large shields out from behind the counter. Handing them over, he grinned at the look on Dylan's face. "2 shields? How am I supposed to fight?" Dylan equipped them, a wide smile stretching his face as the metal implements appeared on each arm. His question was answered by the spikes on the front of the shields. If you push them together, they link, kinda like magnets. Then you jab the bottoms into the ground, and you can pretend to be a wall. The smith seemed pleased at the reaction he was getting. "Look at the bonus you get for having all the set equipped. I think you'll like it. Increased defense, halved movement and weight penalties, and..." Dylan paused, then tears filled his eyes. 35% numbing? Joe, this armor makes it so that I don't feel the pain. "As much pain," the smith warned carefully. "Yeah, that." Dylan started back to the barracks. "Let's get going. I have wolfmen to get revenge on." Joe started to follow, but a loud cough brought his attention to the smith. "Forgetting something?" "Oh, yes. Here's the banknotes. Make sure he never knows about this, all right?" Joe dropped a sizable stack of banknotes on the table, and the smith nodded at him gravely. "It's a good man who returns a warrior's will to fight. In the future, you'll get a discount here." The smith turned and walked away, and soon soundless hammer blows were raining down on an ingot of some kind. Charisma +1, 10% discount gained at Masterwork Metals. Joe had 14 points in charisma, and therefore was now 14% more charismatic than the average person. He liked the thought of that. Turning, he made his way back to his team. Chapter 25. "Let's do this!" Dylan slammed his fists together, sparks flying as his metal gauntlets connected. "I want to get out there and show those mangy, stinking wolfmen who they're messing with." The party was passing through fox territory, and while the foxes were avoiding everyone else, they seemed to be eyeing Joe hungrily. It might just be his imagination. Still, he moved closer to the center of the party and listened to their conversation. Tiona seemed pleased with the change in Dylan's attitude. Glad to hear it. I was thinking that this morning we would go a bit deeper into their territory. We could try and find an area where the higher-leveled ones, like the warriors and mages, are hanging out. Good call on asking the guards to split that quest up. Joe grinned at that as well. Having 3 quests that he actually had a chance to complete in a timely manner was exciting. Joe was getting close to level 6, and the free characteristic points were calling to him like a siren song. Less than 1,000 points to go, and the possible rewards for today would go a long way toward helping him work at his long-term goals. He looked at the 3 quests, hoping they could finish them all in one go. Quest: Scouring the Scouts. The Wolfman population has been growing quickly, and Scouts have begun marking targets for their people to attack. Reduce their numbers. Wolfman Scouts killed, 0 out of 20. Reward: Experience 500, 20 gold. Bonus available if enough are destroyed. Quest: Disarming the Warriors. The Wolfman population has grown fast enough that their fighters have begun using weapons and armor to gain an advantage. Unfortunately, their gear is stolen from the humans they kill before being modified to fit their larger forms. Reduce their numbers. Wolfman warriors killed, 0 of 10. Reward: Experience 1,000, 30 gold. Bonus available if enough armor and weapons are reclaimed or destroyed. Quest: Witch Hunt. The Wolfman population has advanced to a point where they are making connections with the deeper mysteries. Destroy any Wolfman shamans you find. Wolfman shamans killed, 0 out of 5. Reward: Experience 2,050 gold. Bonus available if their magical research is reclaimed or destroyed. Joe almost started dancing when he got the quests, and he wasn't the only one. 3,500 experience, 100 gold, and possibilities for bonuses. For the others, this was a chance to make $1,000 in one fell swoop. For Joe, this was a chance to be able to get his constitution and strength high enough that he could walk at a normal pace and distance for extended periods of time. He almost fainted in delight, or maybe exhaustion from walking so far. There was a small downside to Dylan's new armor. Stealth was no longer an option. He didn't yet have any heavy armor mastery, and he couldn't get any extra bonuses, such as noise reduction, until he got the missing skill to at least beginner levels. He sounded like a forge, each step clanging and clattering. His shields also tended to bounce off his legs as he walked, causing Guess and Chad's eyes to twitch every few seconds as the metal squealed. When they entered wolf territory, they began drawing attacks every few minutes. "I love this armor," Dylan bellowed as yet another wolf staggered backward from a concussive blow to the head. 2 wolves used his apparent inattention to leap at him, but he only laughed and put the shields together, letting the animals bounce off the spiked surface. He had found that he had great abilities with stunning, staggering, and enraging enemies, but dealt very little actual damage. He didn't seem to mind, and simply had great fun taunting his enemies and not feeling pain as they crashed into the wall of metal that was his body. "Dire wolf? More like dying wolf." "Oh no," Guess mechanically spoke as she dug her blades into a wolf's neck. He got his sense of humor back. "That was a joke? I thought he had just taken a blow to the head," Chad chipped in wryly. "A little of this, a little of that," Tiona quipped with a smile at the bulwark. He didn't seem to mind their teasing, and was usually quick to return any verbal barbs. Right now, he just seemed to be enjoying himself. "More. Let's see what level they need to be to do damage to me under this gear." Dylan clanked forward, deeper into unexplored territory. The others looked at Tiona, who shrugged and nodded. "You heard the man. Let's knock out these quests." The group cheered and strolled forward. Dylan hadn't gotten too far, the weight of his armor allowing even Joe to keep pace without issue. When Chad made one joke too many about the slow pace, Dylan replied haughtily, "Pretty soon I'll have heavy armor mastery, and I'll be able to jog at your running speed." As if. Chad sprinted forward, vanishing into the forest in an instant. "Think before you speak, you tin can." "I'll get," Dylan roared, but stopped suddenly as Chad came flying back with a worried expression on his face. "What's wrong?" "I found a trail. There are wolfmen patrolling it pretty heavily. There is a group coming now, 3 scouts and 2 warriors. From the looks of things, we just missed another patrol. If this is the norm, we will only have a few minutes to off this group before another is here." Dylan looked to Tiona. Fight or flee? "This isn't making sense," Tiona said with a growl. "We haven't seen any scouts yet today. And suddenly we run into them and warriors, which we only found for the first time yesterday." "Tiona." "Fine. We fight." Tiona's sword was instantly in her hand. "Battle formation. We'll hit them as soon as they start to pass us. Guess, can you get across the trail and start backstabbing as soon as their eyes are on us?" "Huh." They looked around, but couldn't see the source of the monotone chuckle. "That better be a yes," Tiona hissed into the empty air, followed by a sullen mutter. "I hate rogues." At this point, the Wolfmen patrol was reaching detection range, so everyone stopped speaking and moving. The scouts seemed to be alerted already, their ears twitching in all directions as they padded forward on silent pause. When the first 2 were past the humans who were hiding just off the beaten path, Tiona exploded forward and aimed a brutal chop at the 3rd scout. As a testament to his reflexes, the beast wasn't beheaded instantly, but still gained a deep gash across his chest and bishtek that promised a swift death nonetheless. As one of the warriors began to howl, possibly attempting to bring reinforcements, Chad accurately placed an arrow in the unprotected muscle where his neck and shoulder joined. Instead of a howl, only a pained yelp sounded. The scouts were using their javelins to fend off Tiona and the lumbering Dylan, but Dylan only laughed at their attempts as he barreled forward and let the thin weapons shatter on his thick gear. Tiona used the distraction to move forward with perfect form, her sword dancing through the air. The wounded warrior shuddered and fell, revealing Guess and her blood-dripping daggers behind him. 2 scouts and a warrior having fallen already, the final scout turned and ran while the warrior tried to keep the focus of the battle on himself. He was obviously playing for time, hoping for reinforcements. Joe was determined that no wolf would turn the battle against them, and he snarled as he directed his spell. The sprinting being was at the outer range of his spell, but his speed was his undoing, as a spike appeared in his path. The wolfman coughed blood as he impaled himself, and an instant later, an arrow severed his brainstem as Chad landed a critical hit. The warrior, seeing his chance for life vanishing, snarled and charged Dylan. He began to glow red as a berserker rage overcame him. His sword whistled through the air, and Dylan struggled to keep up as the blows rained down. The others moved to help, but he stopped them. "Gotta." Clang. "Get." Clang. "Used to this." Clang. Clang. The warrior grabbed his sword with both hands and swung in a heavy overhand chop. Dylan lunged forward and interrupted the attack with a shield bash to the abdomen. The warrior fell to the ground, and Dylan nodded to Tiona. She stepped forward, sinking her sword into the prone target. Quests updated, scouring the scouts. Wolfman scouts killed, 3 out of 20. Disarming the warriors, Wolfman warriors killed, 2 out of 10. Joe wondered where his experience notification was for a moment, before remembering that he had set most notifications to only show in a safe zone, or when he brought them up. He looked at the mess they had made on the path and made an oops sound. I don't think the next patrol will miss this when they come along. Yeah, especially with their enhanced senses. I can smell the blood. Tiona looked at the gore and made a decision. Right, we did good work here. Let's start going down the path towards any patrols that are coming. Chad, guess which of you wants to scout ahead? I liked how our ambush went. Let's keep it up. I'll go. Chad volunteered easily. I'm trying to get my tracking and spotting skill up anyway. Might as well get started here. He waved and trotted down the path. See you in a few. All right, team. From here on out, it is going to be a heavy grind. Tiona motioned for everyone to walk as she talked. We expect the patrols to be about 5 minutes walk apart. Scouts use javelins and bows. The warriors are armed and armored. If we can't ambush them, make sure to focus on cutting down the scouts first. They are using poisoned weapons, after all, and the warriors will have a harder time escaping us. As she finished her speech, Chad came bounding out of the tree line. Next patrol, 500 feet out. Off the path, Tiona hissed as she slid into the foliage. They all made it before the next patrol was in sight, though Dylan did have a hard time walking off the hard-packed dirt. His feet sunk into the earth with each step, and he wobbled as he moved. Falling silent, they waited for their foes to appear. It took longer than they thought it would, because apparently the wolves had either heard something or were getting a bad feeling. One of the scouts was lagging behind by almost 15 feet, obviously poised to run if there was a problem. Tiona elbowed Joe, pointed at the scout, and gave him a meaningful look. Joe nodded, stretched his hand toward the scout, and started casting his attack spell. Tiona launched into the mass of wolfmen just as the shadow spike impaled the trailing scout through its calf. Leaping from soft ground wasn't ideal for an Musa bamboo, but she still managed to inflict some light wounds on the wolfmen before they could mount a proper defense. This group only had one warrior in it, but he was well on his way to becoming an elite if the amount of metal he carried was any indication. Dylan's eyes were locked on this enemy, and he strolled forward with a challenging shout at the beast. The warrior was perfectly happy to have an opponent decided for him, and he rushed the bulwark with his cleaver held high. Dylan blocked his blows, too heavy to dodge them, and punched out the warrior over and over with his shields. Joe's first target had collapsed to the ground, falling dead from the accumulated damage of the rapidly cast spell. 30 damage per use was no joke. Another scout had gotten into an arrow battle with Chad, both of them dodging and spinning as they launched projectiles back and forth. Chad was the first to stumble, and an arrow slid into his gut, luckily heavily slowed by his thick leather armor. He grunted, and the scout stopped moving to see if the fight was over. It was his last mistake, as Chad used the moment to launch a precision shot, and the resulting critical hit slew the anthropomorphic wolf. Guest dropped from a branch, landing on the shoulders of one of the scouts, who was using a javelin. As his knees buckled, Guest slammed her daggers into either side of his neck and severed both jugulars. She did a backflip off the scout as a geyser of blood exploded into the air. Whoa. Who? She paused for a moment. That's somewhat less fun to say when it is in a monotone. Tiona had finished off her target and was standing and glaring at Dylan as he fought the warrior. Dylan's new armor was gaining some fresh dents, but the two were fairly evenly matched. The human couldn't deal much damage due to using a weapon designed for defending, and the wolfman could do little damage due to Dylan's high defense. Joe looked at them, then Teona. Shouldn't we help him? Shouldn't he have listened when I told him to focus on the scouts first? She crossed her arms and waited to move until the wolfman's cleaver bounced off Dylan's helmet, causing him to stumble. Then she darted forward, sheathing her sword in the warrior's abdomen as he reared back for a finishing blow. As the last enemy fell, Teona whirled on Dylan. "We are doing a grind here, Dylan. I know you are pissed off at the warriors, but you need to follow my orders out here. We are going for efficient quest clearing, not a cathartic exchange of blows. If you need to hit something to work off your anger, take a job at a smithy and beat on metal. You good?" Dylan blearily nodded his head as Joe topped off his health. Joe hadn't been neglecting his duties. Chad was already cured of his poisoning, as well as being at full health. Dylan shrugged. "Sorry, I got a bit overexcited. Don't do it again. If we finish these quests today, that's half of this month's game pod fee. We don't know how long these quests will be available. If some jerk goes and kills off the whole tribe, we're going to need to find a new income and a set of quests." She took a deep breath. Sorry. I'm already lagging behind on payment this month because the best score we found was the silver wolf hide. We need to step it up and really treat this as a new job. I'm not even making as much as I was at my old office." Chad jumped in before she could get too worked up. "Well, let's not stand around here and waste time, then. Let's get hunting. There is gold to be found and quests to complete." Chapter 26. Quest complete. Scouring the scouts. Wolfman scouts killed, 20 out of 20, experience 500. Continue destroying scouts to gain a bonus or return to town for your monetary reward. Quest updated. Disarming the warriors. Wolfman warriors killed, 9 out of 10. These notifications popped up as they finished slaying the most recent patrol. They had taken some injuries, but between Dylan's new class and Joe's healing, they had been able to continue at a good pace. Looking at his experience from the quest and the 375 gained from the creatures themselves, Joe smiled as he saw that he only needed 112 points to reach the next level. Chad waved and ran off to find the next patrol, while the others slowly moved down the currently clear path. I wouldn't normally ask, but since we are both in pods, Joe's voice trailed off as Teona raised an eyebrow. "What did you do for work before you started playing?" "Huh?" I thought that was going a different direction. Teona winked at Joe, and a bit of color entered his cheeks. "You're going to laugh." "No, I won't," Joe promised as he thought of a way to tease her in return. "It's ironic, but I was a party planner." Teona's words made the others grin. I left that behind because I didn't like the outside stress. Other people changing their minds about massively expensive billable items. The drama. It just got to be too much. From a party planner to a party leader. Guess smiled at her. "That is ironic." Yeah. Teona stuck her tongue out at Guess. "Still, it was interesting. This is better for my sanity, though. Getting chewed on by wolves and having poisoned arrows stuck in you is better for your sanity," Dylan quipped in a serious tone. "Well, the game, literally, is better for my sanity." Teona chuckled, then looked around at the confused faces. "You all didn't read the fine print? Maybe it is just the pods that have that function. No, I'm pretty sure." "What are you talking about?" Dylan prodded her as she trailed off. "The pods balance your brain chemistry like perfectly over time. Why did you think this game is so expensive to play every month if you are in a pod? It's been proven to essentially reset your brain." Depression? Gone in 2 months. No drugs needed ever again, unless you let yourself go. Tiona's eyes were bright as she remembered the controversy this system had generated. Autism? Well, that is caused by your brain chemistry being out of whack. The first patient was cured and reintroduced to society after a year during trials. No scientist can explain it. And since the game's makers aren't advertising this game as a cure for mental disorders, they don't need to explain themselves or release their data to groups like the FDA. So that is why the pods are on back order for a year? Dylan sounded incredulous. I was lucky to even get an updated helmet. Yup. The pods are getting filled up with sick people, and they are often getting preference. No one knows why. They just assume that President Musk is trying yet another way to save humanity. I know the helmet has a similar effect. I think it's just slower. Oh, crap. Tiona pointed ahead. We talk too much. Patrol incoming. Where's Chad? Chad! No answering reply came as Dylan shouted. Damn. I'll draw their attention. Get ready. The group coming toward them was significantly more dangerous than anything else they had fought today. There were 4 heavily armed and armored warriors, and 1 unknown wolfman covered in both bones and leather that Joe assumed to be a mage of some kind. A shaman, possibly. This is what they were looking for. Dylan bumped his fists together and did what he could to draw attention as guests slipped into the shadow of some nearby trees. Tiona glanced at Joe. Joe, take out the unknown if you can. Joe nodded and started making gestures. As the unit raised their weapons in a final charge, an inky black spike shot out of the ground toward the shaman. Dong! The spike slammed into a field of energy that seemed to appear from nowhere. As the spike shattered, the shaman's eyes locked on Joe, and he shouted. The other wolfmen then turned their hard gaze on Joe, and their speed increased. Joe's face paled. Uh-oh. Dylan didn't take too well to being ignored by what he considered to be his rivals. With a bellow, he charged into the midst of the enemies, knocking 1 warrior off his feet in the process. The others were on him in an instant, their blows aiming for weak points and joints. Dylan took on all challengers, and his shield mastery skill helped him redirect attacks as he shifted his stance and took the brunt of the damage on his dual shields. It wasn't to last, though. With 3 opponents and a 4th joining soon, he was beginning to take real damage. Tiona joined the fight, but her attempts to avoid the warriors and cut down the shaman were thwarted quickly, as 2 wolfmen broke off their attack on Dylan to protect their charge. Her ability was apparent in her movement. She was skillfully avoiding attacks and leaving shallow wounds in her foe. She barked, "Cleave!" and the shallow swipe of her long sword turned into a deadly arc of metal that bit deeply into her adversary. A spray of arterial blood covered her just before a fireball landed on her chest and exploded. She flipped backward from the concussive explosion, stunned into stillness as she landed on the packed dirt. A ball of water landed on her next, soothing the burns and restoring some of her lost health. Another landed on her, and she was able to shake off the impact and rejoin combat. Joe sent a few balls of water at Dylan, healing the bruises and reinforcing bones that were about to break from the strain of repeated blows. Casting healing spells was drawing attention back to him, and the wolfmen started attempting to get around the other combatants to reach him. Guess dropped from a branch, swinging her daggers down to take out the shaman in a single blow. Just before her attack landed, the warrior in charge of protecting the frail magic users spun around and slashed out. Guess was sent flying backward, but she left one of her daggers in the warrior's arm. His sword arm went limp as Guess crashed to the ground, spitting up a mouthful of blood. Tiona took advantage of the wounded beast's sudden weakness to deal a finishing blow, and the warrior's head slid to the ground. One of the warriors broke off his siege on Dylan, twirling and running at Joe. Joe didn't see him until the last moment. Having sent a healing spell at guess, Joe turned his head just as the cleaver slammed into his neck, and the warrior was blinded by the blood that sprayed over him. Joe slid to the ground just as the warrior charged back to attack Dylan from behind. The shaman was coaxing another ball of fire to his palm, and as he raised it to throw it at Tiona again, an arrow punched through the fire and the shaman's hand. A look of horror flashed across the shaman's face before the spell detonated. Charred beyond recognition, the shaman swayed and slumped to the ground. "I'm back. Sorry I'm late," Chad called as he fired another shot from his bow. "Better late than never," Tiona ground out as she attacked one of the warriors while harrying Dylan. "They got Joe. Damn!" A swift kick to the back of his knee dropped Dylan to the ground, unable to maintain his position. Tiona killed one of the fighters as the other swung at the fallen bulwark. He was stopped short as a spike appeared and skewered him. The wolfman looked down, saw the hole in his body, and looked back toward Joe. The ritualist was standing, channeling the spike with one hand as he made a rude gesture with the other. The spike vanished, as did the light in his foe's eyes. Joe stepped forward, rubbing his neck as he healed the others. "That sucked," he said in a raspy voice. He coughed wetly. "I sound like I've been smoking for a decade." Tiona just stared at him. "How are you alive? Your head was basically cut off." "Robes. And no matter what we say, this is a game," Joe replied carefully as his voice returned to mostly normal. "These robes are a magic item. If something just about kills me, it sets me back to 1 health. Same thing as when the Silver Wolf ambushed us, remember?" Joe didn't feel like explaining the limitations of the robes. No need to give away all of his trump cards at once. "I want one," Guess piped up. This got a laugh from the group. "It actually sucks pretty bad," Joe wheezed, spitting out some blood. "Yeah, there is the great perk of not dying, but my head was basically severed. Do you know what it's like to feel that? Survive, and then have it reattach as I heal? It's..." There was silence for a moment. Dylan spoke softly then. "How do you do it? It nearly broke me when I was..." Joe thought for a second. "It must be the pod balancing out my mind as the trauma ends. Thanks to Tiona, I finally understand how it is doing it. But..." Joe stopped speaking as he remembered that he wasn't in a pod, technically. The game was able to impact him in a more direct fashion. A notification blinking gold pulled him away from his line of thought. As soon as it had his attention, it displayed its words as Joe was lifted from the ground on a surge of golden wind. "Quest complete. Disarming the warriors. Experience 1,000. Return to the quest assigner for monetary rewards, or work at the secondary objective for additional rewards. Quest updated. Witch Hunt, 1 of 5. Skill increased. Mana Manipulation, Novice 5. Heal, Novice 9. Experience 90. You have reached level 6. You have gained 1 point in Intelligence, Wisdom, and Perception. You have 5 characteristic points to distribute and 16 unused skill points." Joe settled down onto the ground, a wide grin on his face. "Oh, heck yes. I feel good. Guys, I have 5 characteristic points to use. I'm about to be able to walk at a normal human pace." He started reaching for his status window to add in the points, but Tiona caught his hand and stopped him. "Wait." She was squinting at him uncertainly. Are you saying you're about to cross a threshold? A threshold? If you mean getting my stats to a basic human level, 10 points, then yes. Joe's smile was slipping a bit as she shook her head. Wait until you're in a safe area, she unceremoniously ordered. You are almost assuredly going to pass out, and it is going to really suck for you. Also take some time to read the Guild Wiki. As long as you are in-game, it is available to you, and you keep not knowing important things. Are you being serious? Joe's certainty wavered. Come on. I've been waiting for this. I am. She smiled at him, though. Feel free to bring your stats up to 9, though. Just don't go to 10. Fair enough. Joe dramatically frowned, then rolled his eyes. A few more hours wouldn't bother him much. Looking at the stats that were just abysmal, he found that with the 5 points, he could bring 2 of his 3 physical stats to 10, but one would not be able to make it. Strength, dexterity, or constitution. His first instinct was to bring strength and constitution up, but he needed to be practical. As he started to get higher levels of spells and rituals, he was sure that dexterity would come into play. Maybe if he could make hand motions faster or more accurately, could he cast spells quicker? He was almost sure of it, so he put 1 point into dexterity and 2 into strength. The remaining 2 would need to wait until he got home, apparently. They barreled along the path, eager to make progress in their remaining quest. Joe found it a bit easier to keep up, but in reality, a 2% increase was not enough to show a significant change. The day was drifting towards afternoon at this point, and if they wanted to finish the final quest, they needed to give up on stealth and subtlety. Their full frontal charge may have been a mistake because as they rounded a trail, they came upon what appeared to be a sacrificial altar. The altar itself wasn't the issue. The fact that it was surrounded by a small swarm of warriors and a few shamans, all of whom turned their heads to observe the interruption as the party came crashing into the open, was a bit troubling. For a moment, there was silence as the two sides simply looked at each other in shock. The stalemate was broken by a plaintive cry. "For the love of all that is good, help! They're killing us!" A woman bound to the altar was at just the right angle to see the arrivals. Joe felt sick as the wolfmen remembered what they were doing. Without any further pause, the main shaman grimaced and plunged his dagger into the bound woman's heart. A deep throbbing filled the air, and Joe began to feel a buildup of power. The hair on his arms was tingling, standing on end as the abundance of mana created physical after effects. The shaman beckoned, and a warrior grabbed the next bound human and started dragging him to the altar. Timed quest alert. Blood for the beast god. You have stumbled upon an altar that wolfmen are using to commit dark deeds. After losing the better part of their territory to human invaders, the wolfmen are attempting to assert their dominance in a horrific way. Stop the wolfmen before they are able to complete their ritualistic sacrifices. Sacrifices 4 out of 10. Rewards variable. Alternatively, you can choose not to help the humans. If you do nothing, you will gain the option to change your race to Wolfman if the human kingdom falls. You will also gain the title Racial Traitor, allowing you to kill humans for experience. Betraying and attacking your teammates will increase your starting favor with the Wolfmen by plus 1,000. I'm going to assume right now that none of you are stupid enough to betray us, and that you want to save those people. Teona snarled as she slapped the notification out of her view. Battle formation? Guess take out any targets of opportunity. Joe, healing only unless it is an emergency. Chad, try and mess with any spells coming our way. Dylan, let's put that new class to the test. Dylan's only response was to slam his fists together and roar at the warriors standing between him and the people they needed to save. Chapter 27. The altar was raised a few feet off the ground, but wasn't huge or imposing like Joe would have expected from a sacrificial altar. Of course, in his mind, a sacrificial altar should be a huge Mayan structure that thousands of people gathered around for religious purposes. This was just a stone bed that was currently coated in flowing blood, human blood. Joe shook his head to clear his thoughts just as the first few warriors rushed at them. Dylan took center stage, holding off 2 of the 4 warriors with ease, while Tiona and Guess each stepped in to hold off another. The main shaman began chanting, and just as he reached a crescendo, his knife began to descend. An arrow bounced off the blade, turning it and knocking the dagger from his hand just before impact. The shaman ended up punching the bound man in the chest decently hard, but a few seconds of breathlessness was a welcome result for the human. The shaman looked over to see Chad making rude gestures before loosing another arrow at him. Not reacting in the slightest, the shaman watched as the arrow bounced off a translucent shield that the force of the bolt revealed. A small lightning bolt jumped from the altar to the shaman as the spell that he had been attempting to cast created backlash, but he simply tilted his head and cracked his neck before sauntering over to retrieve his dagger. The other shaman looking on seemed to be holding their breath until he returned, shuddering with glee when the chanting began again. "Ha! Filthy mongrels!" Dylan shouted at the warriors he was holding off. He bashed one on the snout as he parried a blow from the other. "I got my shield mastery to beginner 3 already. Your attacks mean nothing." The wolfman that had been struck reeled backward, grabbing his nose as it streamed blood. He snarled animalistically and started hacking at Dylan with brutal overhand chops as the other tried to slip around Dylan's defense with a more tactical approach. The brutal chops were easily predicted, even if they were powerful, and not one of them slipped by. "You should probably call this Mutt's older brother," Dylan called into no one in particular. "It seems his little sister stole his weapon and armor and is playing dress-up." Foam appeared around the warrior's mouth as his eyes lost all sanity. He tossed aside his sword and started slamming his claws into the obstacle in his way, trying to tear Dylan apart with his bare hands. When he was easily blocked, he tried to grab the shield and pull the bulwark off balance. Failing miserably, he dropped to the ground, a spike of shadow having stolen his life before he noticed the damage accumulating. "Joe!" Tiona called angrily as she whirled around her opponent and eviscerated him. "What did I tell you not to do?" "Oh, come on." Joe laughed as he tossed a healing spell at Dylan. "That was a perfect opportunity. I had to take it. Tiona didn't say anything else, but her silence only ensured that the conversation would be happening at a later date. Joe looked at the altar and heard the chanting once again, reaching a peak. As he noticed an arrow get deflected by a shield a subordinate shaman was maintaining, Joe had an idea and grimaced. As the knife came down and slammed into the captive's chest, Joe channeled a ranged healing spell. A flow of water reached the attempted sacrifice and settled into a laminar stream. The shaman pulled the knife out of the human, already motioning for another sacrifice, when the bound man coughed. The shaman looked shocked, even more so when the feedback from his failure to complete a sacrifice at the correct time hit him, finally noticing the stream of water connecting the humans together. He shrieked, his ears flattening against his head as he snarled at Joe. Seemingly reaching a conclusion, he waved at 2 of the lesser shamans. They left the area around the altar, joining the fight against the adventurers. At this point, Guess had been injured fairly badly, but was surviving thanks to a hastily wrapped bandage. All but the last warrior facing Dylan had been felled, though there were other warriors that were currently assisting the shaman. These warriors were motioned to join the battle as well, and Joe winced as he noted how heavily equipped they were. These were certainly the elite of the Wolfman race. Now facing 7 enemies, the party closed together again. Joe stopped healing the sacrifice, knowing that the magical Wolfman only stabbed at the peak of his chant. He healed Guess to the maximum amount, unable to heal the fractured bones in her hip, noting that his mana was down to a quarter as exhaustion began settling on him. Joe grimaced as he thought about Tiona's orders. He should have listened. Over half of his mana had been used for that channeled spike. It was refilling fairly quickly thanks to his huge regeneration. But the battle was nowhere near over. In fact, it looked like the battle was just getting started. The largest warrior, easily the highest level elite, approached at a jog. His movements were so fluid that when he was dodging, it almost looked like Chad's arrows were poorly aimed. The elite half-turned as he got close and swung his cleaver almost casually at Dylan. The bulwark caught the blow with a grunt, actually being forced back a few feet as his armor vibrated under the powerful blow. A fireball hit the ground at their feet, causing blisters to instantly form on any exposed skin as the flames washed over the group. Joe quickly countered the blaze with his healing water spells, but frowned as they only healed half the amount they normally did. It seemed that the magical flames were going to need a more concentrated healing effect than he was currently creating. Not good. The elite was battering Dylan around like a practiced dummy, and the other 3 were closing in quickly. Joe looked around for a solution to the issue and saw that Guess was running into the forest. He almost called out, but stopped himself at the last moment. If she was trying to circle around, he didn't want to ruin the element of surprise for her. Tiona shouted a war cry, boosting their stamina and strength by a small amount, and launched herself at the incoming warriors. Her sword was flashing back and forth, her skill allowing her to hold off the 2 wolf men on her own. She wasn't able to strike devastating blows, but she and they were beginning to bleed from multiple cuts. Fortunately for her, she had a healer in her corner. As she wore them down, she was able to continue battling unabated. She needed to stay close to the warriors, because anytime she broke away to gain distance, a fireball exploded against her. Chad was doing his best to break whatever magical shielding the shamans were using, but no matter what angle he tried, his arrows continued to bounce off the shields surrounding the 2 of them. Quest updated. Blood for the beast god. Sacrifices 5 out of 10. Joe's head jerked to the side as he got the notification. He watched as the unsmiling shaman tossed aside a corpse and motioned at one of the few remaining members of its race to bring forward another human. Joe shouted in fury and started swinging his scepter at the elite attacking Dylan. Sadly, he was unable to damage the massive warrior with his pathetic attacks. A backhanded blow sent him reeling and coughing out blood. He instantly healed himself and tried to think of a way to be more helpful. Breathing deeply, he stared at the warrior Tiona was fighting and prepared himself. Carefully positioning his hand, he made the required gestures and created a spike under the warrior's foot just as he stepped backward. Expecting solid ground, the warrior's ankle turned and he fell with a startled yelp. Tiona didn't miss the opportunity and sliced open the wolfman's neck with a flick of her wrist. She tumbled to the side as a fireball whizzed by her head, and after regaining her footing, she began fighting the other warrior one-on-one. Now that she was able to focus on just one battle, the wolfman started to lose badly. In just a few moments, he fell as well, surprise etched across his beastly face. "Tiona!" Dylan shouted, as a bright blue fireball cast jointly by the two attacking shamans burned through the air toward her. "Stand behind me." His legs seemed to move almost of their own accord, and he blurred as he sprinted at triple speed to get between her and the fireball. Dylan's arms slammed together, and he jammed the completed shield into the ground. The fireball detonated against the man, and screams filled the air as the metal he was covered in became superheated. The blast was otherwise entirely negated thanks to his position, but his armor was glowing as red as it had when it was being forged. Dylan continued to yell in pain as the armor applied a damage over time effect to his body. Joe threw a ball of water at him in an attempt to heal and cool him, but it was a poor decision. The water almost instantly turned to steam, scalding Dylan's face through his visor and pulling another pained cry from the man. Another ball of fire was being formed between the two shamans as they chanted together, but it seemed that Guest decided to return to the battle in the nick of time. She sprinted up to them as their brows furrowed from concentration and plunged her daggers into the mana shield, covering them. Again and again she stabbed as the fireball began to roil. With a sound like glass shattering, the shield broke and her daggers plunged into unprotected kidneys. Freezing as the pain and shock overcame him, the shaman lost control of his portion of the spell. Guess only had a second's warning, but managed to squeeze herself behind his rigid body. The fireball exploded wildly, finishing off the damaged shaman and critically wounding the other. An arrow was finally able to sink into the downed shaman, ending his existence. Chad shouted in pure exultation as he watched his opponent expire from his feathered shaft. Quest updated. Witch hunt. 3 out of 5. Quest updated. Blood for the beast god. Sacrifices. 6 out of 10. "Drat it!" Tiona shouted furiously. "We're losing people over there. Let's cut this magically compensating pup down to size and end this." She and a pained Dylan began working together better than ever, her attacks going unanswered as Dylan blocked every slash the elite could muster. She was able to circle around the huge beast, swinging low as Dylan launched forward. The combination sent the warrior flying, knocking the wind out of him as he landed. Tiona swung her sword back, but before she could finish him, a spike shot into the gap under his helmet and into his brain. Joe had the grace to look sheepish as both Dylan and Tiona made a "what the heck" gesture. "Sorry, I'm not trying to steal your kills. He was going to gut you as your swing came down." He pointed at a long dagger the elite was gripping in his hand, the final resort of the desperate. "I'll let it go this time," Dylan said in a mockingly angry tone. "That all of them?" "Looks like it," Tiona called darkly. "Carve these shamans a new spell hole. Quest updated. Blood for the beast god. Sacrifices. 7 out of 10. Son of a... Joe stopped himself, taking a deep breath. He sped up. "Joe? Buddy? Make with the healing? Pretty please?" Dylan dropped to one knee, panting heavily as he struggled to keep his tunnel vision from turning into full-blown unconsciousness. "Oh, right. Sorry, my charred friend." Joe pressed his hand against Dylan, and water started pouring over him. By this point, the armor had lost most of its residual heat, and the healing properly took effect, since the damage under his armor was the result of superheated metal, not the magical flames. Technically, there was no issue restoring him to full health. Joe glanced at his mana, noting that it was now just barely over an eighth full. The group moved toward the altar, determined to stop the horror taking place. The main shaman gave them a derisive sneer, motioning the remaining shaman forward as his chanting increased speed yet again. The party jogged forward, but the shaman erected a dome of power around the small area. Moments after creating the shield, they began sweating and trembling. Obviously, the cost of creating and maintaining the barrier was high, and their mana was likely also being sapped to fuel the dark ritual being performed. "Break through it," Tiona ordered, emphasizing her words with action, her action being chopping specifically at the shaman's face. Though he flinched as the blow descended, her blade stopped dead an inch from impact. She was undeterred and took this chance to work out some anger. Her sword crashed down over and over as the shaman paled further. As the rest of the team joined, the main shaman stabbed another human. Quest updated. Blood for the beast god. Sacrifices 8 out of 10. The main shaman hurriedly pulled 2 bound humans right next to the altar and tossed the unlucky one onto it. He started his chant again, much faster this time. Sparks were flying as the team attacked the barrier as fast as possible. The chant reached a crescendo, and the knife plunged down yet again. Quest updated. Blood for the beast god. Sacrifices 9 out of 10. "No!" Dylan roared, slamming bodily into the barrier. Tiona screamed as her blade clashed with the magic, which finally gave way. The shield shattered with a thunderous boom. The 2 shamans sustaining the energy field fell into deep unconsciousness, their eyes rolling back into their head. But for Joe's team, it was much worse. The energy of the shield exploded outward, tossing the humans back. A portion of the damage they had done to the barrier affected them as true damage, ignoring all protections, while a larger part of their delivered force slammed into them as pure kinetic energy. Joe was surprised to see the others tossed away, seemingly damaged to an extreme. He felt only a tiny impact, as he had been unable to participate directly in the destruction of the barrier. The chanting was becoming louder, so Joe decided that healing needed to wait. Now was the time for destruction. He narrowed his eyes and ran forward as quickly as his wasted legs would allow. He was still 7 feet away when the dagger rose into the air in preparation of being used, so Joe began forcing his remaining mana into a shadow spike. Inky darkness slammed into the stomach of the wolfman, but he managed to continue his chant, though it was now sounding more like a wheeze. As the dagger began to descend, Joe had only one option remaining to him. Narrowing his eyes and hoping for the best, he jumped at the wolfman. As his muscles bunched up, he felt a supreme confidence fill him. His body knew exactly how to jump to create the best effect. Joe launched into the air, spinning as the shaman grew larger and larger in his vision. He drew back his scepter, planning to slam it into the animalistic chest presented to him, but he had misjudged his trajectory. Instead of jumping past the wolfman, Joe's momentum carried him directly into the shaman. Joe twisted like a cat, trying his best to land on his feet, but instead belly flopped against his intended target. He tackled the shaman to the ground, Joe's momentum too great for the wolfman to counteract. Looking at the creature he was pinning to the ground, Joe was surprised that he wasn't being savagely mauled by the cruel beast. He glanced down, realizing that the titanium tag lock on his scepter was jammed directly into the shaman's heart. Joe staggered to his feet as he tried to see the results of his actions, but turning his head made him lose balance and fall to his knees. Both his mana and stamina bar were completely depleted, and the sudden movement caused him to puke all over the fallen wolfman. Realizing how far he was from his starting point, Joe was shocked at the knowledge that he had just jumped nearly 10 feet directly forward from a very slow movement speed. Was his jump skill really that overpowered? Joe forced himself to stand on his unsteady legs, walking over and tugging at the rope, binding the sacrificial human's hands and feet. The man thanked him brokenly, and for the next few minutes simply sat and cried over the bodies of his comrades. Joe looked over to see his team getting to their feet. Before coming up to the altar, they took a moment to impale the remaining wolfmen who had fallen into a stupor. His team looked to him and nodded. Joe returned the nod, finally taking the time to acknowledge the notifications awaiting him. Quest updated. Witch hunt, 5 out of 5. Experience 2,000. Return to the quest giver for monetary rewards, or continue trying for the available bonus if Wolfman magical research is reclaimed or destroyed. Quest updated. Blood for the beast god. Sacrifices, 10 out of 10. You have failed the quest. Error. You have completed the quest. Error. The notification window vanished with a sound like breaking glass, reappearing after a nerve-wracking moment. How very interesting. You have simultaneously completed and failed your quest. To your credit, you fought valiantly against your foes and will not be labeled a race traitor. There is only one small issue. You completed the sacrificial ritual by killing the Wolfman shaman via stabbing him through the heart at the correct moment during this ritual. What is your luck stat? You really might want to look into that. Normally, this situation would result in automatic quest failure and a wave of dark beasts sent to attack your city at night. You seem to be a special case, though. So there is an added option, Mr. Error Generator. As a ritualist and champion of a different deity than the one the ritual was designed for, you have met the requirements needed to wrest control of not only the activating ritual, but the altar as well. You may have a single chance to take control based on your knowledge of rituals. You have 5 minutes to attempt to do so. And reward. Control of altar. Wave of dark creatures will attack wolfmen population. Failure. Human city. Ardenia will have a powerful wave of beasts attack them through the night, and you will make me bored. This is the second time you've elevated an issue to me, so I will be paying a bit more attention to you. Also, boom, you're cursed. New title gained, Baldy. Effect. Your head is permanently bald. You cannot change this fact. This title is mandatory. Wigs will burst into flame if placed on your head. Wearing a hat will give you a temporary -1 to charisma. Your head reflects light. Minus 20% ability to hide when in sunlight. Some settings have been permanently changed. Chapter 28. Joe, what's going on? Dylan called out as he approached the altar. Also, what happened to you? Your hair is falling out. No time for that. Already feeling the mana in the air beginning to thicken, Joe swallowed his frustration and opened his character sheet. The quest changed. I have one chance to stop this ritual from taking effect, or the city is going to be attacked by extra strong monsters tonight. With a sad farewell to his accumulated skill points, Joe dumped 12 of the 16 painstakingly gained points into his ritual skill. Skill increased. Ritual magic. Apprentice. 3. Congratulations. Your hard work and dedication to perfecting your craft has allowed you to become more powerful. Based on your usage of the ritual skill to this point, you gain an addition to your abilities. Ritual magic now grants a 10% bonus to your chances of success when you are attempting to optimize, change, or create ritual formulas. Get out there and change the world for the better, or reduce an opponent into a puddle or magic a rock into solid gold. The only limiting factor is you, and what a limit that is. Intelligence and wisdom +1. Allowing 3 minutes of his allotted time to pass before he started his attempt, Joe tried to calm his mind and prepare himself. His mana had fully regenerated at the 2-minute mark, but he was still nervous that he might make things worse. With a deep breath, he approached the altar and placed his hands on the swirling light. In his mind, a large ritual diagram appeared. It took a few seconds for him to grasp all the elements of what he was seeing as the ritual spun slowly. Rituals could move. This was too far out of his experience. He almost panicked, but then he saw a few symbols that he recognized from the study of his book. From there, he was able to puzzle out the context and meaning of most of the remaining symbols. Overall, it truly wasn't an overly complicated diagram. It was simply well-made and massively powerful. Essentially, it took in the blood, experience points, stamina, and mana of the sacrifices and donated them as power to whatever deity controlled the altar. Looking over the diagram, it was easy to see how worn and faded it was, meaning that this ritual had been here for a very long time. If he was able to change it, the likelihood of another party being able to undo his actions was exceedingly low. Joe smiled at the thought. In the kingdom, mages had long ago declared ritual magic a useless skill. It was time to prove all of them wrong. The first symbol that changed was in the target field. It currently held the symbol of Ardania. Joe was unsure at first how he was supposed to change this mark, but then his perception highlighted a symbol that all of the wolfmen had on their clothes or armor. He nodded to himself and recreated the symbol in the ritual. He allowed his own mana to seep into the pattern, reinforcing the thinning lines of the aging ritual. The slow and jerky rotation of the spell circles smoothed, speeding up and spinning at a faster rate. Lastly, Joe looked down at his clothing and overwrote the symbol of what he assumed was the beast god with the sigil on his robe. Now, this altar would be devoted to the hidden god. Simple changes, but hopefully all that was needed. Joe looked over the changes one last time before stepping back and hoping the entire thing wouldn't explode. It didn't detonate, but it did begin shaking. Everyone in the area hastily retreated just before the altar was sucked into the ground. There was an awkward pause as his team gave him the stink eye, but to his relief, the altar quickly reappeared from the ground in a new configuration. Instead of a bed of stone coated in generations of muck, a pristine slab of marble rose from the ground. The main features were similar, but instead of a bed, the altar now had the overall appearance of a large stone book. Quest complete. Blood for the beast god. After defeating the priests and warriors of an opposed race in pitched combat, you sullied their holy site and dedicated it to another deity. Remaining anonymous should be its own reward, but you greedy travelers probably want more than life-saving anonymity. Experience 1 thin base 1000 plus 100 for each human saved. 1 class item box guaranteed to contain an item with a minimum rarity of rare. Minus 10,000 reputation with the Wolfman race for destroying their altar of holy rituals. Current reputation, blood feud. Since there were no surviving Wolfmen in the area, your reputation with the Wolfman population will be reset unless they learn the cause of their people's loss. Lucky you, brutality seems to be your key to success. You know what? Luck +1. Why not? Current reputation with the Wolfmen, neutral. Fractured title gained. I choose to be. This title grants a 10% boost to any title it is combined with. Quest alert. Reclamation of the Lost. Congratulations. You have completed not only the original quest, but gained a hidden quest. As a champion of a god, you have the ability to capture altars and holy sites, rededicating them to your deity. While this will make your own power and favor grow with your god, be warned that followers of differing gods will see you as an enemy if they find out you are attempting to take their holy area away. Capture any altar, temple, statue, holy site, place of power, or effigy to gain favor and power from and for your deity. Rewards variable. A small box appeared in front of each member of his team. They all eagerly grabbed their reward and stored it away for later usage. Chad was looking around nervously. Just because they had cleared a small area of wolf men, there was no guarantee that more would not soon stumble upon them. "Ooh!" Dylan hooted excitedly. "I didn't die. I didn't even get too seriously injured. I love this class and armor. I knew you were the right choice for a meat shield, tank role," Chad called over, getting a laugh from Tiona and Guess. "Let's get out of here." The group started to walk away, stopping when they noticed that Joe was not walking with them. Tiona's voice took on a hard edge as she noticed him standing at the altar. "Joe, get moving. We're going to need to run if we want to make it back before nightfall." "I need to write down this ritual," Joe distractedly called back as he finished pulling paper and quills out of his pocket. "Why?" "It is insanely powerful. If I can modify it so that it doesn't require blood sacrifices, we could use this to—" Joe was cut off by Dylan snorting at him. "She means, why are you taking it down by hand?" "Seriously, man? Read through the manual and guild wiki when we get back. Take a screenshot of that thing and work on it at home." Dylan's words made Joe blush heavily. He hadn't considered that. Actually, he hadn't even known it was an option. "Treat it like reality, Joe," Joe grumbled in a mocking tone as he made a screenshot of the ritual. "Make sure you know all the game functions so you can cheat reality, Joe." "Are you really complaining that you can take a picture instead of using an hour to make a drawing in hostile territory?" Tiona incredulously teased him. Joe muttered some unintelligible words before turning to walk away. He took half a step before stopping, frowning as something tickled at his senses. He cocked his head and looked at the altar. As the others complained, he walked back, reached under it and found a small indentation. His fingers touched the space and a needle stuck into his hand, drawing blood. He grunted in shock as a notification appeared in his vision. Skill increased. Hidden sense. Novice 2. You are finally letting your instincts guide you. Too bad they're so underdeveloped. You've missed a lot of good items. Gain higher levels in this skill to increase how powerfully hidden information and items call out to you. Congratulations, you are the first traveler to take control of a fast travel point. Out of your whole species, you are the first to look for anything not overtly obvious. What does that say about your people's attention span? Nothing good. These points can be found at most important landmarks across Eternia. Since you are the first person to capture this point, you may choose to take control of it. Take control. Yes or no? Joe chose yes, and his eyes widened as he read over the new notification. Congratulations. As the owner of a fast travel point, you can set a toll for its usage. This might be the only thing in your life that you can really control, but let's not think about that too hard. Don't let the existential dread set in. You can choose to take 10% of the user's mana or stamina and donate it to your deity, or require a monetary transaction which will be deposited to your bank account. What would you like to do? Joe thought about it for a long moment, but forced his inner greedy squirrel to go back to sleep. He chose to make the donation go toward Tatum. Now anyone who got to use this would lose whatever was more abundant to their class. Mages would lose mana, others would lose stamina. Joe smiled as a white circle appeared around the area. In his vision, it was a beacon shining into the sky, but the others were looking at him with annoyance, obviously not seeing the light. "Joe, let's go already," Chad called impatiently. "Hey guys, come here." Joe couldn't stop a smile from making his face twitch. "I need to, show you something." He snorted from the effort needed to stop his laughter. There were a few muttered curses, but the others decided to humor him. When everyone was in the circle, Joe chuckled and used his new rights as a travel point owner to give them access. They flinched as the beacon of light seemed to appear around them and went wide-eyed when they were asked if they wanted to fast travel back to the only available location, Ardania. Quest updated. Earn a god's favor. You have progressed far on the second step of this quest. Keep working hard. Progress, 83%. A smile almost split Joe's face as he saluted the team and accepted the transport. He blinked and appeared in Ardania. Within moments, he was surrounded by the rest of his team. Chapter 29. Back in his room, Joe snorted as he remembered the walk back to the guild. He had brushed off the team's questions, explaining that it was a cleric thing. Since they had been at an altar, the others had no choice but to accept his word as factual. Though they hadn't done it gracefully, he had promised to open the point to Aten and give him permissions that would allow select guild members to use the travel point. This would let Joe keep donations to Tatum flowing and keep his standing in the guild fairly high, even if he were off doing something different for a while. As much as Joe wanted to tell them what they wanted to know, there was no possible way that he was going to give up the information on how to activate the travel points. Being able to move huge distances was a staple of any game for the last few decades, and he knew that if word got out, he would have far too much competition for his burgeoning idea for a travel company. When he had gained enough fast travel points to make a wide network, he would open them to the public and rake in the rewards. Maybe he would retire on a mountaintop in a few decades. Joe now had a longish-term goal, and he hoped no one else would beat him to completion. They had stopped to turn in the daily quests, so each of them were now 100 gold richer. The others were happy with the outcome, but Joe really wanted to know what the rewards would have been if they had been able to complete the optional portions of the quest. The real reward Joe was interested in was the class item box he was staring at. It contained a guaranteed rare item, and Joe's hands were sweaty as he reached his trembling hand toward the clasp, keeping it closed. It swung open, revealing a small black book. Joe began beaming as he picked it up and inspected it. Reward item. Perception check is automatic success. Item identified. Beginner's Encyclopedia. Circulus. Forbidden rare. This is a book containing dark rituals used to destroy, demolish, or otherwise impede your enemies. The knowledge contained has been forbidden by the Mages College, and all copies existing during the Purge were destroyed. While once this book would have been considered uncommon, its rarity has been adjusted due to external forces. Caution: creating the rituals contained in this book, while in the presence of a licensed mage, will result in a sharp reputation loss with the college. Activating them discreetly will not, as most effects are similar to various spells. You really shouldn't worry about that, though. Maybe you should declare war on the mages. It'd be fun. Looking at the book, Joe inspected it with his occultist job. The book glowed mostly golden, showing that while there was room for optimization, most of the rituals contained within were accurate. Opening the small book, He was excited and a bit disturbed by the effects of the rituals inside. There were only 5 complete rituals drawn out, but there were also multiple symbols, shapes, documentation of effects, spell forms, and components most commonly used in rituals. In essence, it was an encyclopedia which allowed you to make your own rituals with far greater ease. Right now, there was only one attack ritual he had a chance of completing. The others required the next tier of monster cores, and he simply had no idea if he could get his hands on one or what it would cost to do so. Ritual magic excelled as utility magic, long-term with intricate effects. These were offensive rituals, yes, but they were obviously designed as last resort doomsday devices, not commonplace weapons. Looking over the only completed attack ritual he could use, and they were definitely attack rituals. Joe had to wince as he read the description of its effects. Gravedigger's Requiem. This ritual targets a single creature, and upon activation emits a sonic field around the victim. This field is attuned to the frequency of earth and stone, and will soften the ground in a 3-foot radius around them. All earth in the affected area will act like quicksand, dragging them deep into the ground. Typically, the target will vanish without a trace, making this a preferred ritual for the assassination of important figures. Component cost. Copper tuning fork capable of reaching between 5 and 9 hertz. Any tuning fork of uncommon quality or above, blood or hair of target. Grave dirt, sand shark's tooth, emerald, flawed or better, 80% of a full low-grade monster core, and 1,000 mana. After reading the requirements, Joe felt that he could get most of the listed items without too much issue. He wasn't positive, but it was likely a sand shark was a monster, which meant that it would be harvested for components. He figured the alchemist would have this item, but he wasn't sure where to get a tuning fork. Was there an instrument store around here? What else would he need? 80% of a core was 400 points, which meant it should cost him roughly 80. He did another quick calculation in his head. The mana requirement should be feasible, and it would cost him 445 mana, exactly 1 more point of mana than he currently had. He rolled his eyes. His regeneration would ensure that he gained the needed point of mana before it became an issue, but it still irked him for some reason. Wait, he was forgetting his mana manipulation and coalescence skills. With a bonus 8% efficiency, he had more than enough mana. He could stop cursing Terra now. An evil chuckle rocked him as he allowed himself a short vision of grandeur. Joe would stand on top of the world one day and make the earth swallow dragons for him. Laughs. Cough! Joe choked for some reason, making himself cough a few times. He took a sip of water, hugged his new book, and went to sleep. At least that was his plan. As his eyes closed, Joe remembered that he had 2 characteristic points to spend. His eyes flew open, bloodshot and excited. He sat up, pulling open his status sheet and staring at the 2 stats about to cross the threshold into normal territory. With hands almost trembling from excitement, he allocated 1 point into both dexterity and constitution. Accepting the changes, he waited to notice a difference. Minimum threshold for normalcy achieved. Body modification starting in 3, 2, 1. Ow. 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 Ambient mana was sucked from the environment, fueling the rapid growth of his body. Joe winced as his nerves tingled, making his body twitch. The process sped up, and soon he was thrashing on his bed as if having a seizure. As this slowed down, Joe began to feel heavy. His body slowly sank into the bed and he began to cough. Not cute. Little oh dear me, there seems to be a hint of pollen in the air coughs. These were a version more along the lines of, "I've been smoking for 30 years and my lungs seem to be full of tar." It was a good analogy because thick, black fluid came out of his mouth with each noisy hack, landing mostly on the floor. The substance seemed to boil into nothingness and left Joe feeling as though he were imagining things. When all of the shaking, coughing, and sputtering were complete, Joe stood up and tried to get a feel for the changes that had occurred. It was strange. He felt heavy and slow while simultaneously being able to control his movements to a higher degree. Walking over to the small mirror provided with his room, Joe looked at himself and nearly started dancing. He didn't look like a walking corpse anymore. He had healthy flesh and color for the first time since appearing in this world. His body had filled out, and while he didn't exactly have a set of thick, corded muscles, he did have muscle tone on his lean figure, as if he had never left his room, but also ate exactly the amount of food he was supposed to. He pulled open his status screen. Name, Joe Baldy. Class, cleric, actual, ritualist. Profession, scholar, actual, occultist. Level, 6. Experience, 17,078. Experience to next level, 3,022. Hit points, 50 out of 50. Modifier, 50 plus 10 per point of Constitution over 10. Mana, 462.5 over 462.5. Modifier, base 625, 12.5 per point of Intelligence, plus 100% from Deity. Mana region, 6.82 per second. Modifier, 25 per point of Wisdom. Stamina, 50 out of 50. Modifier, 50 plus 0 plus 0. Characteristic raw score. Modifier. Strength 9. Modifier, 0.09. Dexterity 10. Modifier, 1.10. Constitution 10. Modifier, 1.10. Intelligence, 25. Modifier, 1.25. Wisdom, 27. Modifier, 1.27. Charisma, 14. Modifier, 1.14. Perception, 23. Modifier, 1.23. Luck, 14. Modifier, 1.14. Karmic luck, plus 5. He looked at his hands and smiled. Now he could walk normally and do the basic functions that a human should be able to do. He would still attack with all the force of a fluffy pillow and could tell that he wouldn't be able to carry anything extra. But he was still overjoyed at his apparent fitness, feeling greatly pleased with his expenditure of characteristic points. Joe climbed into bed and allowed himself to drift off to sleep. The following morning, Joe awoke feeling chipper and excited. It seemed that a healthy constitution also made it possible for him to sleep on his poor quality bed and still gain the well-rested bonus. He felt ready for the day, and Joe could hardly wait for the shops to open. Ignoring his wrinkled robes, Joe walked to the common area to scrounge up some coffee. Soon, he would be able to test out a new ritual. Soon, he would. At that moment, Aten walked into the room and called for everyone's attention. Listen up, people. We have, as of this morning, become a noble guild. The calm early morning atmosphere shattered as everyone either whooped, called a question, or just excitedly began to chatter. Aten waved his arms and shouted to regain the attention of the group. Today, unless you have a time-sensitive quest, I want everyone to stay in town and wait for myself and the guild officers to return. We have been invited to the castle to receive our first noble guild quest directly from the king and queen.